Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com. Vikram Rangala, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Hey, Robert. It's great to be here. Thank you.
It is an honor to have you on. You are the first guest in what I think we're going to be calling the God Bless Bitcoin series, which is
Amen.
Amen. A series of interviews we're going to be doing with the religious figures that are appearing in Brian Estes's documentary by that title, God Bless Bitcoin, where I haven't seen the documentary yet, but as I understand it, he's exploring Bitcoin through a moral, ethical, theological lens, Bitcoin and money more broadly. And today, you and I are going to be speaking about Hinduism and how it pertains to Bitcoin. And just by way of quick introduction, you are the executive director of Zeb Pay. You are the CEO of G Fund, and you are a former professor at the University of Florida in writing and communications.
Yes, correct.
And it is great to have you on today.
It's exciting to talk to you after I've been reading your work since probably 2020, 2021. And I remember reading, we talked about this before, The Number Zero in Bitcoin, which is one of your well-known pieces. And at the time I was thinking, I hope I get to meet this guy one day. And so it's happening.
Yeah.
And so, well, I'm really having
I'm honored to be a part of your orange pill journey, and I'm glad the fates have brought us together. And it's fun. It was actually, so zero came from the Hindu Arabic numeral system.
Yep.
Right? This was the superior technology, basically, that outcompeted all the other mathematical technologies to become the global standard. And I think, as I tried to hammer out in that piece, that there are many parallels to the spread of an unstoppable idea like zero with the spread of an unstoppable idea like Bitcoin. Both in that they offer a lot of, basically it's what tool is best for the job, right? That it really serves people's interests, and therefore it spreads despite any power structures that might be arrayed against the spread of that idea.
Yeah. It's a pull rather than a push that makes it unstoppable. In a sense, it, it's a need that people had that Roman numerals weren't satisfying, and and the lack of a zero, the lack of being able to use a decimal point was not
Hmm.
satisfying.
Hmm.
And and in India, it was even more because the word shunya in Sanskrit is the word usually used for zero, and it solved a lot of philosophical problems as well
Mm.
as the mathematical problems. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later, I think, because in India, mathematics and religion never really split apart from each other.
Yes.
And interestingly, I don't mean to be like a pro-India chauvinist or anything, but in the West, these are called the Hindu-Arabic numbers,
Yes.
but Arabs call them India, which is Indian numbers.
Ah,
They're
yes.
yeah. So the rest of the world just calls them the Indian numbers, and in fact, even Fibonacci called them the Indian
Yes.
numbers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the piece, and this was I was largely getting this from two different books, which I cite in the piece. The Discovery of Zero and Zero, the Biography of a Dangerous Idea. But they trace the origin to the Indian mathematician Brahmagupta.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's a perhaps apocryphal tale, but it was said to be, quote unquote, discovered in meditation, basically. Like it was the experience of nothingness.
Yeah.
And
Um. Yeah. Go on. Go on.
that just blew my mind. I was like, are you kidding me? Someone like had an experience in meditation and then figured
Hmm.
out, oh, there's something practical here. This isn't just
Yeah.
some isolated experience I'm having. This is like I'm actually in touch with something important about reality. And then they imported that into the numeral system. And then boom, the whole world changes. Everything changes from
It
that. And
is.
that was
It is.
mind blowing.
There's, it is. And there's another thing, one of the questions you sent me in advance was about this word rationality. And I thought
Mm.
about that a lot because,
Hmm.
and I'll save that for when we get to it. But the point you made about discovering ideas in meditation, um, because in India there was never that Cartesian split, that it's named after Rene Descartes,
Hmm.
the idea that there was some compromise made at some point between church and the science community, like,
Yes.
you know, don't let your science interfere in our religion, and we won't bother we'll keep away from science and not try to
Hmm.
influence that. And and we'll stop, hanging people like
Yeah.
Galileo for saying things,
Yeah.
you know.
Right. How nice of them.
But, you know, and so, but it meant that science was often, religion was almost like a taboo for scientists. Like
Hmm.
scientists, would take pride in saying, "Oh, I'm agnostic. Oh, I'm not very religious." And you still meet scientists who are like that
Hmm.
sometimes.
Hmm. Hmm.
And sometimes having too much religious belief is seen as being superstitious or
Yeah.
being non-rational, non-logical.
Hmm.
Logic is seen as the purview of something other than religious belief.
Hmm.
And for Hindus and other Vedic cultures, Buddhists
Hmm.
and Sikhs and Jains, there's never been that divide. There was never required to be such a divide. So mathematics was a deeply spiritual practice. In fact, mathematics proofs were usually given in Sanskrit poetry, in slokas,
Hmm.
and many times each syllable would have a double meaning so that on one level, the proof would be that you take the denominator from here and the numerator from here, and then use those two factors in this
Hmm.
calculation to produce this result. And so
Hmm.
it's laid out. But at the same time, it could also be a very poetic description of Lord Krishna or a
Mm,
poetic uh, description of what it means to be free from greed and desire,
mm,
And so and this was a requirement for professional mathematicians that they also be religious scholars. And
mm.
that's continued even to this day. Like you may have heard of a mathematician named Ramanujan. There was a movie starring Dev Patel about him just recently. He died very young, but he was responsible for several proofs, including a couple of very difficult proofs, and he went to Cambridge and explained how he had done these proofs. And the method was unlike anything that even his Cambridge teachers had reference points for.
Mm.
And it's because for him, they came to him during meditation and specifically praying to a goddess, which was the goddess of his household.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just one of the local goddesses of his village. But for him, she embodied this ability to tap into larger truths.
Mm.
And so he would just basically commune with her and she would show him
Mm.
and he would write it down. So you can imagine going all the way to Cambridge and trying to explain this to a very rational early 20th century, British
Mm-hmm.
academia. And but the proofs were solid, and they remain in use today. So it is possible that you can have this, and I wonder if maybe we'll go back to that sense of allowing ourselves to be both spiritual and rational, and
Yes.
not have to apologize for one to do the other.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got on a sidetrack the
No,
instant we
no.
started off the.
You're
Yeah,
excellent. It's an excellent point that they're popularly considered to be at odds with one another, science and faith, let's say. But if you
yes,
but if you what is there's some saying about this. It's like the first sip from the water of science makes you atheistic, but by the time you get to the bottom of the glass, you're in theology or something like that, right? It's all the great
yeah,
thinkers sort of go through
mhm,
the logical domain and they realize, oh, there are this epistemic domain is finite, right? Knowledge can only get you so
yeah,
far. And then there's the
yeah,
domain of the unknowable, something like that.
yeah. Particularly for
And
physicists, this was
yes,
true in the 20th century. A lot
yes,
of them became. In fact, there's a large statue. If you can see, there's a round statue behind me of Nataraja, which is a form of the god Shiva,
yeah.
but he is the lord of the cosmic dance. It's the dance
Ah,
of
yes,
destruction and creation
yes,
and transmutation of energy and mass and matter throughout the universe.
yes.
And so there's a large statue of Nataraja on the campus of CERN, the research center in
Mm,
Switzerland, where
mm-hmm,
all the atom smashers and a
mm-hmm.
whole lot of theoretical physics research gets done. And it's because the physicists wanted it.
Yes,
And so
yeah.
many of them had just accidentally become more or less Buddhists and Hindus just through their study of quantum mechanics and stuff.
That's amazing. For people that are
Yeah.
interested in this is a book I read early on in life, The Tao of Physics
Oh yeah, Fritjof
by
Capra. Me
Friedrich
too.
Capra, and that
Yeah.
one will definitely awaken you to the parallels between ancient mysticism or religion or philosophy and
Yeah.
modern science. Although I think it was written in the 1970s, it's still an excellent book.
It is.
The other thing is that people don't understand that science itself is premised on faith, right? That there's this, and this is gets to the bottom of Western philosophy, right? That the idea of Platonic goodness is
Yes.
this promise that is never broken, that the
Hmm.
structures of our intelligibility track the structures of reality. So like we're able to map the territory, but we can't
Yes.
prove that. We can. It's literally just faith. We're just going on faith. Like
Yeah.
it's always worked. We assume it will
Hmm.
continue to work. Another way to say this is there is no scientific justification for the existence of science. Like you can't empirically prove that empiricism works,
Yeah.
something like that. And
Yeah.
the whole
Yeah.
thing is
Yeah.
faith based. And for anyone that's super rationally atheistic, I think that just sort of blows apart your argument. So um,
Hmm. Yeah. Pythagoras was very religious. His
yes,
his his beliefs about mathematics were
yes,
more religious than
yeah,
cold and rational,
yeah.
according to our.
I don't think there's a great thinker that didn't have. I mean, religious might be the wrong word, but at least they had a notion of God. Let's say, right, that God is
Yeah.
part of this. It's almost the way I try to explain it or think about it, and I could be wrong, but again, when you get to that domain of the unknown or the unknowable, well, you need a word for that, right? And so we use the
Hmm.
word God, just like
Hmm.
with the zero, right? You need a number for no number, right? You need a category for no
Yes.
categories. You need
Yes.
something to represent that which is unrepresentable, something like that.
And in Hinduism, that word is Brahman. It
Mm,
literally means that ultimate truth that simply cannot be defined,
mm,
known, conceived of, because even the mind that is doing the conceiving is part of Brahman,
yes.
right? It'd be like, taking a look at your own eye,
Yes. Right. Right.
to put a crude
Yeah.
example, but
Yeah.
in a sense, you can't do that.
Yes.
The universe can't know the universe because the
Yes.
universe is part of that universe, right? And
Yes.
so, but at the same time, for Hindus, there is Brahman, which is this ultimate reality, which is
Yeah.
all of reality, the ultimate truth. And then there's Atma, which is the individual manifestation of that Brahman.
Ah.
And so soul is not exactly a good translation for it.
Yes.
There's some overlap with the Judeo-Christian concept of a soul,
Yeah.
but Atma is the idea that we can come back to this later, but this idea that one of the images used in the Vedas, which is the oldest scriptures, foundation scriptures, is that there's this giant fire, which is
Mm,
the fire of all creation and becoming and evolving and in a manifestation. And little sparks from that fire. And each of one of us is a spark of that exact same flame.
mm,
We're not different from it.
hmm.
We're just one aspect or one manifestation of it. So, in a sense, you and I, Robert, we're actually the same one being or the one entity that
Mm,
has chosen to manifest itself as Vikram on one end in Mumbai and
hmm.
as Robert on the other end in Florida,
Mm,
so that we can interact with each other and play whatever game it is we're playing of
mm.
discovery and mutual education or whatever happens.
It's fascinating. It
And,
reminds me of, I think, Alan Watts too, saying something similar, but invoking an aqueous metaphor instead. He says, like, we're all
Mm.
waves on the surface of the same ocean, something like that, where
Yes.
there is one
Yes.
consciousness or one, I don't know, some unification between human experience. I don't know. And it's
Yeah.
obviously difficult to define. I like that you said too, ultimate reality. You said it was Brahman, right? It's ultimately
Yes.
undefinable, right? And again,
Yeah.
the words we're using, if you try to divide by zero, the result is undefined, right? It's undefinable. You can't think in terms of
Yeah.
the Brahman because it is part. It's anyways,
Yes.
yeah, very mind blowing in almost a literal sense. Like your mind, if it tries to grab it, your mind blows because it can't grasp.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
you mentioned a couple of these terms that I think segue nicely into our first question. I think you used the term shunya.
Hmm.
I think that is either synonymous with or closely related to shunyata.
Yes.
Um, and then there's also the term nirvana that came up in
Hmm.
when I was doing the number zero on Bitcoin that was related to that.
Yeah.
The first question I would like to ask you in the scope of obviously looking at the concept of freedom, what is Bitcoin through a lens of Hinduism, let's say. My first
Hmm.
question is, what is freedom?
Hmm. So there's a word in Sanskrit, moksha, and I'll try to explain moksha a little bit, and then I'll go back to give a little more context, and then I can also talk about freedom in a more societal, political, economic, those
Mm,
types of freedoms. But
mm-hmm,
moksha, it's usually translated as liberation because it doesn't mean like license, just go do whatever you feel like.
mm-hmm,
Instead, it's more like a freedom from ego, freedom from unhealthy attachments, freedom from selfish short-term desires where
mm,
you don't really see the bigger picture, freedom from illusions that, may be holding you back. And in big picture, it's even freedom from, in the Hindu concept of reincarnation, freedom from those repeated cycles of death and rebirth
mm,
and going through yet another life of suffering and learning. It's liberation from that wheel
mm,
of
mm-hmm,
death and rebirth. It's different from the concept of salvation that you find in Abrahamic religions, because for most Hindus, there's no original sin.
mm,
There's no concept like that in the Veda. And so there's nothing to be saved from in that literal sense, but instead it's more about realizing your true nature. And your true nature is that you're the spark from that flame. It's that you and that universal truth are actually one. So, that's a very, as you said, mind-blowing concept, right? So we encounter it in little glimpses in life. You may just have a moment of feeling like, wow, this universe is big, or a physicist suddenly, looks at, quantum mechanics and realizes, oh my God, this universe is even bigger than I thought. And I'm a physicist and I knew how big it was, right? But it can also come in ordinary day-to-day types of liberation from illusions that we're plagued by. So, like a mundane example would be, let's say you start a business and you're an entrepreneur. And let's say you start it by identifying some actual deep, important need in the world. And so if you can go about it by, instead of focusing on immediate quarterly profits to impress my investors, or immediately how much can I raise in my Series A, or things like that, and instead just stay focused on who's really in need, how can I serve them, there's a profound liberation in that. It's like, okay, never mind those shareholders, they'll get theirs when they get theirs, and never mind my ego, I'll impress my buddies at the high school reunion one way or the other. You know, you can be more brave when you're just thinking, by God, that person needs this product that or this innovation that I'm trying to put out there in the world. It's going to make their lives better, and so I've got to do it one way or the other. When you get that, you get courage in a way that, you're unleashed in a certain sense, right? And so, a lot of times when we're trying to get security, whether it's through amassing wealth or, controlling others or whatever it is, what we really want is not security. What we really want is freedom from insecurity. We want to have that freedom from those burdensome thoughts, and that fear. So let me back up a little bit and give a context for where moksha fits. So the Vedas, which are the oldest scriptures, in fact, they're the oldest books
This is
known.
the Rig Veda is the oldest book known, right?
Yeah, the Rig Veda is the oldest of the four.
Yeah.
The other three kind of sometimes duplicate verses from the Rig Veda and sometimes enhance them, add to them. There's one Veda called the Sama Veda, which is actually mostly focused on just the music of the way in which the verses of the Rig Veda must be chanted. So it's very precise musicality, very precise emphasis and movement between notes, all designed to take your mind into altered states of meditation. And the thing is that Samaveda is at least 3,000, 4,000 years old. But if you go to any two schools in two far apart corners of India, they will sound identical. The teaching from guru to student, generation after generation, has been so precise and so exhaustive that it's been maintained. And so, but anyway, so in the Veda, there are four things which are the legitimate pursuits of all human beings. Basically, everything that we do comes down to our pursuit of four things. One is what's called artha. Artha can mean wealth, but in a larger sense. It's like well-being, abundance, wholeness, as well as prosperity and material. It's also the power to do things. So it's earthly power, the power to have enough money and connections to say, I want to go and play tennis with Oprah next week, and say, I know how to make that happen. I don't know if that's really possible, but I suppose for somebody it must be possible, right?
Yeah.
Or I want to build a huge building where here there's nothing, right? That kind of power. The second is kama, which can mean pleasure or enjoyment, but it's enjoyment of all kinds. So it can be sensory pleasure of a good meal. It can be the intellectual pleasure of solving a difficult puzzle or problem, or enjoying a beautiful work of art of some kind. Now, wrapped inside pleasure, kama, and worldly well-being, artha, is dharma. And dharma is justice in a sense, but it's really justice in the sense of just being in alignment with the forces of the universe as they are.
Mm.
It's not a justice that says I'm conforming to what Guru A or Guru B or Prophet A or Prophet B said. It's, it's just alignment with the way the universe is. And so we try to pursue artha and kama in various ways. Some of them foolish, some of them kind of screwed up, and sometimes also noble and good. But finally, the fourth pursuit is moksha, this liberation, which means liberation even from the desire for artha and kama and dharma. And so you realize that, okay, this world is it's a play that's going on, and I'm playing a part in it. But so, it's legitimate for me to want to go after wealth. In fact, we're meant to be wealthy because we live in a world of abundance. Poverty, as you've pointed out, and I've also talked about this in lectures, it's an artificial creation. If the world really worked the way it can work, there wouldn't be poverty. It's kind of manufactured, and we could limit it to a great degree. So, but pursuing wealth, it's best to pursue wealth in alignment with dharma. So basically, it's best to pursue wealth without exploiting anybody, without cheating others, without cheating myself. It's legitimate to go and seek the pleasure of beautiful art, or a nice meal, or a foot massage, or a surprise party, whatever it is that you enjoy. But after a while, you get wealthy, you get pleasure in life, you've gone to as many spa resorts as you can. You start to realize these are means and not ends, right? These are means to something. And so moksha doesn't mean, therefore, okay, I'm done being rich and enjoying myself, so I'm giving away all my money and I'm just going to go to the mountains and meditate and be poor. Abstinence by itself is not freedom. In fact, abstinence can be a prison, right? You decide, and plenty of people, they've gone to a monastery and said, I'm going to be a monk now. And all they can think about is, man, I miss my Lamborghini. Man, I dated some hot women back in my day. Whatever it is for you. That's not freedom at all. But instead, imagine that you can be a billionaire, but you're a steward of those billions. And, you feel that you have the privilege of using them in the world. But you'd be fine if they all went away, and you were back to bank account zero.
Yeah.
And you also have the confidence that, I could probably become a billionaire again. I know how it works. So it's that liberation from the fear of life in a lot of ways. So anyway, how does this, I won't give such a long answer for all the other
I love it.
things, but this ties back to the thing we're talking about a lot with Bitcoin and money and the idea of being free from near or actual slavery, which is still a huge industry. I mean, human trafficking, along with drugs, is probably it's one of the biggest industries in the world. Or debt slavery. I've got to keep working because I still owe on my student loans. Or just being tied to a job you hate, but you love the title, or you love the perks, or you love the way other people look at you because you have it. Or you got 2 kids going to expensive colleges and you can't afford not to be in this job you hate. This kind of, the idea of moksha, which is a very abstract personal liberation, ties to these in the way that we work together. So Vedic economics, which comes from Vedic philosophy, is designed to create a system that helps people to achieve wealth, security, pleasure, but do it in alignment with dharma. Do it in a way that's nonviolent towards one another, and that also allows us not to be attached to negative ways of achieving those goals, right? I mean, you've talked a lot about how, we've created now a system where we have billionaires and super billionaires and, now 200 billion billionaire, levels. But pretty much all those billionaires depend on this corrupted money system, right? We've been, if that failed, if central banking failed, it'd be very bad for them. And so we've created a system whereby acquiring wealth requires you in some way to be part of a system that you might personally find morally objectionable, but There's no other way to get to $100 billion.
Right.
And that's one of our central problems. So, there's a verse from the most famous verse from the Bhagavad Gita. It says, you have a you have the right to control what you do, the
Mm.
process by which you achieve things,
Hmm.
but you have no right to expect to control the outcomes. Okay,
Mm.
so this is a rough translation,
Hmm.
but and so, but the thing is, when you get into a system where we focus on outcomes rather than processes, then, for example, I'm a trader, and you go on YouTube and you try to look up videos on trading. You see thousands of videos that say, with this indicator, you'll get 80%, hit rate, or
Mhm.
I turned $100 into 7,000 in 2 days using this super stochastic double oscillating whatever it is,
Mhm.
right? That you can download for paying me this much.
Mhm.
And almost nobody makes videos talking about detachment and mindfulness
Mhm.
and just practice, 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 which are the keys to trading, right? It's boring and nobody wants to look at the process, even though the process is where it's literally where the money is made, right?
Yes. No, no, that's man,
So it's,
what an
yeah,
excellent,
I mean,
excellent answer.
it is. I mean, if you just maybe we'll talk about this a little more, but if you start thinking about all the places where we think about outcomes instead of processes,
Mhm.
I really believe this is how you've written about this and how employees become just lines in the expense part of the
Yeah.
spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And and your coworkers who should be your collaborator. In a healthy company, they should be your partners in innovating and doing something great and cool for the
Mhm.
world. But instead, coworkers become your competitors in this zero-sum contest for the next promotion or raise,
Right.
right? And cultures of companies, fail and they implode and become toxic and awful, right? So, so this is the idea that Vedic economics kind of put forward, was to be a system for unleashing and liberating.
Mm.
So freedom was kind of baked into it, and it worked. It worked for thousands of years, actually.
Fantastic. As you're talking about the focus on process at the end, I'm reminded of Mises, right? He would always say the market is a process, right? Market is the process. How did he say it? Oh, Z market is a process. Basically saying the market is a process. That was his
Uh,
German accent. And
yeah,
it is, yeah, it's easy to think about things in static terms, but reality is much more dynamic. And this
yeah,
idea of moksha as liberation, you were saying like realizing one's own true nature. A market can only exist in its true form if we have private property. And this
yeah,
is something we think it's a kind of a modern social institution, and it is in some ways, but it's also, I mean, it's pre-human, it's pre-language, right? If you try to take
yeah,
a squirrel's nut away, like the squirrel will get mad, right? You try to go hit a
yeah,
beehive with a stick, the bees will attack you, right?
yeah,
There's this territoriality that's inherent to almost
yeah,
all social creatures. We have just
yes,
wrapped it in this social institution called private property, right? We've tried to legally
mm,
authorize something that's innate in us.
yeah,
And when you have that, right, when you have strong private property, you have disincentives to violence and coercion. You're incentivizing cooperation and production. And
yes,
you were saying earlier that that's like this idea of having a servant's heart, right? Where you're actually focusing on what can I do for people? What problem can I solve for consumers rather than how do I raise my Series A? How do I impress my high school friends? Like if you maintain a focus on how do I solve a consumer's wish, that
yeah,
is a key to liberation, not only for yourself, but you're also liberating the consumer, right? They have a problem that they want solved. You are
yeah,
solving that problem for them in a cost effective manner and selling that
mhm,
idea into the world. And the whole world, if you do it right, can benefit from that. And
yeah,
it's through those layers that we build civilization, right? One layer of problem solving frees us to focus on higher level problems and we solve those and so on and so forth.
yes,
And this, the poverty point you made too, this is also kind of tricky because it's okay. Poverty in one sense is the natural state, right? We're just born naked and afraid and alone in the middle of nowhere. So it's like, okay, that's,
Yeah.
but if you leave people alone and you don't coerce them and you honor, you know, this natural territorial instinct, or, enshrine it in private property and you protect private property, well, then people quickly engage in the division of labor, economic cooperation, and we create economic abundance. And the extent to which we are liberated through private property is the extent to which we alleviate poverty in a way. So
Mhm.
it's like this idea of freedom and then these pursuits, right? Well-being, enjoyment, alignment with the universe, moksha itself, liberation from all of the above is found in liberation. Like we actually give ourselves the liberation of private property that we don't need to kill each other over every sandwich, right? We can resolve our
Yeah.
disputes non-violently through the rule of law, through discourse and
Yeah.
dialogue. Then we actually free
Yeah.
ourselves from poverty.
Yes, because if it's a fair, if my private property didn't come from me squatting on yours and then bribing someone to,
Right.
give me the deed to what used to be yours,
Yes.
but instead it's I exchanged value and bought it. You exchanged
Yes.
value for yours and you bought it, and now as rightful property owners, we're in the best possible position to be good neighbors,
Yes.
right, next to each other.
Yes. Yeah, we're playing by the same rules, right? If
Yeah.
you steal someone's stuff, you're basically breaking the rules. And if you break the rules, the game degenerates and we move
It
away from
does.
civilization back towards barbarity, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think it can be overemphasized enough how important that is, right? You like the rules of the game need to be played by. If they start to be broken, it might advantage you in the short run somehow to steal that guy's sandwich. But what you're doing is you're pulling the thread of the social fabric and it's starting to
Yeah.
unravel, right? So your
Yeah.
kids or their kids might live in a very a worse world, let's say, as a result of you deciding to advance your own short run interest by taking that sandwich. Um,
That's where the idea of karma comes in, right? Karma,
yeah.
eh, people think that, I mean, there's all sorts of popular definitions of karma. Karma literally means action, and what you do,
Mm,
right? But, you know, I've got a cup of tea here. If I tip it like this, okay, my action is tipping the cup, but the
mm,
consequence is the tea is going to spill in my lap, right?
mm-hmm.
So does the action stop at the tipping of the cup, or am I also responsible for the spilling of the tea? Yeah,
Mm,
it kind of goes together, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I can't, but when we have a system whereby we externalize so many of the costs of, hey, I run this great factory, and sure, I dump a bunch of toxic stuff into the river,
Yes,
but those aren't on my books,
exactly. And it's private property
right?
that keeps it on your books. Because if you dump in my river, and it's my river,
Yes,
then I can
yes,
litigate you or I can seek retribution for you violating my
hmm,
property in a system that works and protects private property.
yes.
But if it's public property, then it's what Aristotle said, when everyone owns everything, nobody takes care of anything. Right? There's not an incentive for someone to actually protect and impute the cost of your dumping in my river onto your books.
There is, but the one thing that does get taken care of is a few people in power take care of each other.
Yes. Yeah.
So that, the people who actually live next to the river and drink the water are usually not the ones. I mean,
Right.
they can't afford to live anywhere else,
Yes.
right? And this is usually this is where Marxists come in and have some argument for protecting the little guy. I
Yeah.
sympathize with, as you do, with protecting the little guy, but the real truth of it is that it's just a matter of unfair accounting, or rather, it's a
Yes.
matter
Rules.
of perpetuating an illusion. We talked about liberation from illusions,
Yes.
moksha.
Yes.
The illusion that, well, I've got a $2,000 suit and I run this amazing factory and my stock is here,
Yeah.
you know. So my picture on the cover of Forbes doesn't look like the picture of a guy who's poisoning a whole lot of kids,
Right.
and destroying a bunch of,
Yeah.
natural areas. But that's also what I've done, right? But if I can bribe enough people and control enough lawmaking
Mm.
so that I don't get blamed for that. So we create the illusion that I had nothing to do with that. That
Mm-hmm.
happened downstream, right? And so and we accept a whole lot of these illusions.
Mm-hmm.
We just freely accept illusions that anybody who looks that good couldn't possibly be doing
Mm-hmm.
anything bad.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyone who drives a car like that must be a nice guy,
Right.
you know.
So true.
Or yeah, or anybody who talks about God so much must be godly.
Mm.
Well, sometimes, and sometimes the most godly people don't talk about God at all. They just do their thing.
They just act, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know karma meant
I mean, didn't
action.
Jesus say by their fruits you will know them, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's very interesting. And the Marxist description of the little guy, being trampled on. I actually, sure, I see that. Like, I think a lot of us see that in the world.
Mhm.
The prescription, however, to solve that, I think is exactly wrong, right? Marx wanted to abolish private property. I think it's the exact
Yeah.
opposite. It's you want to strengthen private property. That's what protects the little guy, right?
So, yeah.
He can protect the
It's
fruits of
it's
his labor and climb the rungs of the economic ladder.
yes.
Um,
It's patronizing to say otherwise.
yes.
And it diminishes the idea that every human being is equally divine, has that
Mm-hmm.
spark,
Mm-hmm.
is that spark, and is fundamentally a creator,
Yes.
not a consumer, not a victim, not a line on a spreadsheet,
Mm-hmm.
a creative force,
Mm.
part of the universal creative force.
Yes. Beautifully said. I think this, then, what we're saying is, well, it's a moral system, right? To respect one another's person and property,
Yeah.
which is maybe taking me in my next question here. What is love?
Um,
what is, you know, we would do this out of, I mean, I guess there's a rational element to this, and we'll talk about rationality later, but there also seems to be kind of a loving element to the idea of just treating one another as this creative agent in the universe. Um,
yeah.
how do we define love?
So when I was teaching at the University of Florida, I taught a course called Writing in Love, which was very popular. So obviously
Hmm.
answering some kind of interest and need there. It wasn't about romantic love. It was about nonviolence and conflict resolution,
Hmm.
both on a personal and interpersonal and even inter-community things. So we studied
Hmm.
Gandhi, we studied a whole lot of different things. And one time we were talking about conflict in a story, and one of my definitions of love is that it's the force in a story that makes heroes out of both sides of the conflict.
Hmm.
And what I mean is, a great example would be in Star Wars. Luke Skywalker redeems Darth Vader so that in the
Hmm.
end, Darth Vader saves his life, right?
Hmm.
Now, a lot of stories we have, the bad guy just gets killed,
Hmm.
you know, and those are sometimes really good stories, right?
Hmm.
But the bad guy gets killed, but everybody who followed him somehow gets redeemed, or
Hmm.
the world around gets redeemed in some way, and so it's not just a revenge fantasy story. There is something else about restoring
Hmm.
balance. So love is not just affection, although affection can be part of it. It's not just feelings, because sometimes feelings don't even enter into it. But the one thing that's always the case is, in my definition of love, and I think not just in Hindu belief, but even in Christian love or
Hmm.
concepts in Islam. Like if you look at Sufi writings about love, the
Hmm.
poetry of Rumi, for example,
Hmm. Hmm.
you can't expect anything in return.
Hmm.
Love often requires you to do something. Again, we talked about process and not outcome, right?
Hmm.
You can control how loving you are towards another person.
Hmm.
You can't control whether that person will do X or Y in return,
Right.
you know? And the thing about love is the same way the sun shines, there's that metaphor even from Ecclesiastes, right? That, and people say popularly that the sun shines on everybody, good and
Mm-hmm.
bad,
Mm-hmm.
right
Mm-hmm.
and wrong, whatever. The same way, if our society, our economy allows us to cultivate that ability, that innate ability we have to do whatever we can for the spiritual growth of others, you know, uh, love is that, even if we don't like them, and especially if we don't like them,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you have to love people that you just don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is very different from being nice. I just had a delivery. I paid for it with, I don't know if you've ever heard of this UPI, Universal Payments Interface.
No, I haven't.
It's a thing that they have in India now.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you scan a QR code and you can send money
Mm.
instantly,
Through the banking
or just
system.
send it to. It's a banking system, but it's for people. You don't even have to be banked to use it,
Huh.
and it's free and it's instant and it's universal. So, like the fruit vendors and the snack vendors on the street who have
Mm-hmm.
little stands like this size, and a guy who's selling snacks off the back of his bicycle,
Yeah.
they will still have a QR code and I can scan and pay them. They prefer that to cash.
And how does it work if you're unbanked? Where does that go?
You get a wallet inside the
Ah,
app,
okay. So you're getting
and you
a pseudo bank account
a
for some
pseudo,
reason.
yeah, just
Got it.
a little holding bank account.
Got it.
And so it has turned this
Sounds
into.
convenient, but highly centralized.
It is centralized, like as much as banking
Yeah.
generally is,
Yeah.
but it has opened up people's idea to cashless life. And
Huh.
so it's moving, and it's democratized the ability to have, payments without using cash.
Yeah.
So
I could
yeah,
see that going.
it's
That could cut both ways, right? It could pave the way for a CBDC type implementation or open people to a Bitcoin.
it's doing both, and we're gonna have both. I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
another showdown that'll happen,
Yeah.
CBDCs. So, but
Yes.
it's all part of the process. So what I was saying about love, I'll just finish this point. So, love is not always nice, and it's not certainly polite. Okay, because
Yes.
kindness is often not nice at all. I studied Aikido for years and ninjutsu also, and you know, sometimes Aikido is considered to be a nonviolent martial art,
Hmm.
but at the same time, if somebody attacks me, I may need to, in order to stop him from doing something really bad, like harming me or injuring me or
Mhm.
hurting somebody else, I might need to very forcefully take him to the ground, pin
Mhm.
him, hold him,
Mhm.
cause some pain, get him to rethink his life choices, right? But the question then becomes, which is more loving? Allow somebody to commit a serious act
Right.
of harm, or cause them temporary pain and discomfort?
Mhm.
So even Gandhi said, if you see something wrong happening, if somebody is in danger and you have the choice between stopping it using violence or doing nothing at all, use violence.
Yes.
But ultimately, you have to fight against injustice with your whole being, no matter what. So Gandhi was very clear about this. It's just that he knew nonviolence was a more effective method when you can use it properly. So
Yes.
love is more about that. It's about action and thought that is aimed at the spiritual growth of the other,
Mm.
and not always about happy, rainbow feelings.
Hmm. That's really well
Yeah.
said. And there's a lot of consistency there with the libertarian principles of the non-aggression principle,
Hmm.
right? In which we
Yeah.
do not aggress against one another's person or property. But the other
Right.
side of that coin is self-defense. If someone is aggressing against you, then aggression is warranted and justified.
Yeah.
Um, and this is really, you talked about conflict resolution at the beginning of your answer. That is the core purpose of private property. Also of free speech, interestingly enough, right? I
Mhm.
love the definition of free speech is that so that our ideas can go to battle and die so that our bodies don't have to, right? This idea that we can
Mm.
resolve conflict via discourse and dialogue rather than direct. violence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it's interesting that again, the idea is conflict resolution. So there's an element of love in private property, an element of love in free speech. And
Ye-
this idea of it as a redemptive force, that's really interesting to me as well. Obviously, the archetype of the Redeemer in uh,
Yes.
Christianity, at least, is right. Christ, right? Christ is love. We often say God is love,
Yes.
Christ is love,
Yeah.
Christ is God,
Yeah.
etc. And that word
Yep.
redeem is very interesting because it has a couple of meanings, right? You can redeem your soul, right? Save your soul. You can also redeem a certificate, right? Or a coupon.
Hmm.
Right? So it can either mean like to save in this very transcendental sense, but it can also just
Yeah.
mean a very simple economic exchange, right? You used to be able to redeem dollars for gold, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's interesting, right? There's this essence of exchange built
There is.
into love. Love is a redemptive force. And
From a Hindu point of view, though, I mentioned that for Hindus, the idea of having an original sin from which you need to be saved
yeah.
isn't the metaphor so much as having illusions that you are a creature of wanting money and wanting fame and
Hmm.
wanting these things, to clear away that illusion, to realize
Mm,
actually you're one with the universal creative spirit,
mm,
right? And so redeeming could also be, in a sense, revealing the true nature
mm,
of something, right?
mm,
When you love somebody who is full of self-doubt and you're able to give that person confidence, and
mm,
a martial arts sensei, is often going to do that. My sensei would, it would throw me like repeatedly. It was physical, outright physical violence if you looked at it.
mm,
My mom, would hate to see me getting beat up that way. But what he was doing was helping me to tap into my courage and
mm.
my ability and my inner strength. And, that's why they say, the difference between a mentor and a parent is a mentor isn't bothered by seeing you suffer, whereas a parent will absolutely
Yes.
want to stop the child from, especially helicopter parents nowadays, they just
Yes.
want the kids to constantly not be given any negative feedback in schools and
Right.
things like that. It's gone a little too much in that extreme.
But that's actually
Whereas
harming your
mentors,
child in the long run.
it is a
Yes.
good mentor will say, no, 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 I love you, but this essay sucks,
Yeah.
right? And here's why.
Yeah.
But when I was teaching writing, I would sometimes give very low grades. I remember one time I said, this essay is so bad, no letter between A and F is sufficient to capture the full badness of it. So please rewrite it. But the thing is, that was so over the top that the student was just like, oh my God, F you.
Yeah.
All right, fine.
Yeah.
And they came back with this brilliant thing. And I said, how did it go from this to this?
Yeah.
And they're like,
Wow.
I used to write like this in high school and I always got A's and it was just BS. But I realized you actually want the real stuff. So I'm giving you the real stuff. And I was like, why didn't you just do the real stuff all the time? I'm like,
That's
okay, from
great.
now on I will. Right. So I guess they call it tough love, but
Yeah.
tough love is love.
Yeah.
The key is that you see the divine in the other person, right?
Yeah.
In God Bless Bitcoin, one of the questions I talked about this greeting, namaste, right?
Yeah.
Namaste means it means I see the divine in you
Mm,
and in myself, and the two
mm,
hands meet, right?
mm,
So, and once I see that, okay, Robert Breedlove is a spark of that divinity,
mm,
same as I am, right? Once I'm infected with that idea, then I can't treat you as
mm,
less than human, and I can't behave myself
mm,
as less than an honorable human, right?
mm,
Without some element of guilt or something else.
mm,
There's karma
mhm,
involved coming in.
mm.
Once my eyes are awake to that, right? So love has to do with just that starting point. You can't hurt someone without dehumanizing them in
Right.
your eyes first, right?
Right.
Which is why, totalitarian systems
Yes.
and evil systems, the Nazis had to dehumanize Jews and
Right.
and and
Right.
and other groups before they could convince ordinary people that they were a danger, and it was okay to hate them, right?
Yeah.
And we have rhetoric all around the world now dehumanizing one group or the other,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
And we do it to women in a lot of ways, right? Like, yeah, you're good enough to be senior VP, but the C-suite is, another thing, right?
Yeah.
You'll have that in the United States and in India and other places. Now, why? Why shouldn't a woman be the CEO?
Right.
Just because for 100 years we've had male CEOs. There's no logical reason.
Right.
So you got to back up and think, are you seeing her full humanity
Mm.
or not? And once you do, then even if it's like, okay, but to mentor her, I've got to toughen her up, which means I've got to put her through the same toughening process that I would a male that I was
Mm.
grooming to be CEO, right? But she's up for it. I've seen women who are like, they coddle me too much because, they think I'm never going to try to be at the top leadership.
Mm.
And so they're just being nice to me. But I know that being nice is actually a bad sign because it means that they don't take me seriously.
Mm.
If they took me seriously, they would not be so nice to me. They'd be more scared of me. They'd see me as the competition I really am.
Right.
And so, I've had these conversations with women, and it is, that's a very subtle form of dehumanization.
Yeah.
Subtle forms, they also are often widespread.
That's very interesting. And this idea of seeing oneself in another, right? As you said about namaste,
Yeah.
the source of empathy, right? And empathy is obviously closely
Empathy is
connected
the
to
word.
love.
Yeah,
And
Robert, that's
also,
the word.
an evil is an inversion of this, right? When you actually use your self consciousness to say, oh, this thing that would hurt me, let me use that knowledge that I've gained through self reflection and impose that on another, right? It's almost an inversion of empathy, is
Yeah.
almost like the essence of evil in a way, and or a way to describe evil, I guess. And I like this other framing of it doesn't necessarily need to be a saving from original sin as we have in Christianity, but it can just be the saving oneself from being deceived by illusions.
Yes.
Right. So you're really just saving through revelation of truth, something like that, right? Or at
And,
least
and
getting
Satan is described as a master of illusion, right? And
exactly,
Shaitan in Islam as well. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And truth is has been, I think it's Heidegger says truth is disclosure or unconcealedness. So this idea of penetrating illusions is
Yeah.
truth in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which takes us to our next question.
Uh,
What is truth?
yeah. This is my shortest answer. So there is this word Brahman that we talked about before, right?
Hmm.
So that there's this idea that there's an ultimate truth. It's beyond all conception. It's beyond all descriptions.
Mm.
There's no way to say, when we define anything, we say it is this and not that, right?
Yes.
But Brahman is both this and that. And it is
Mm.
also not this and also not that.
Mm.
It is the shunya as well as
Yeah.
the fullness, right? It's all these, it's the creator and the creation.
Uh,
So on that side, we can't know it, but yet at the same time, each of us is this Atma or a manifestation of that ultimate truth. And so self-discovery is also discovery of that larger truth.
mm.
So the inward and the outward kind of are mirrors of each other or
Mm.
complementary processes.
Mm.
And dharma is just our effort to be in alignment with that truth,
Mm.
or our perception of what is in alignment with that truth.
Mm.
So, but there's a Vedic verse that explains it, that roughly translated, it's the truth is one, but people or wise people, the people describe it by many names.
Mm.
The truth is one, but the wise call it by different names.
Mm.
And so this is why you have, for example, multiple names for deities, for gods in
Mm-hmm.
Hinduism. We can go into that a little more when we talk about God, but
Mm.
it is the idea that, there is one truth. Neither of us is smart enough to know it,
Mm.
But if we're humble enough to say, we can't absolutely know it, but we can help each other along our individual journeys towards trying to know ourselves
Mm.
and to understand it better.
It's interesting. I think something I've been writing about recently, and I think the way you're describing that is consistent with Neoplatonism as well. That ultimate, capital T, truth, ultimate reality is beyond words.
Mhm.
Whereas, and I'm just starting to wrestle with this. I'm not fully informed, but the Aristotelian view, or the view of Ayn Rand, who follows Aristotle, is more that no, we can have ultimate truth within words. Knowledge can wrap around
Mm.
the whole thing. But it seems, I mean, at least intuitively true to me that that's simply not the case, right? That what would be the value in beautiful art or poetry or, a sunrise if we could capture everything in words? We could just read about it
Mm.
versus living it. And
Yeah.
so yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, I want to ask you another question.
Mhm.
Um, and it's about justice. What is justice is the question, but I'll give you my answer first, just as a framing,
Sure.
because we keep talking about private property. I always like to just distill justice into saying, justice is people getting what they deserve. Private property is people keeping what they earn. Therefore, private property is just. Um,
Mm.
but I would love to hear how you define justice through the context of our discussion today.
So, you know, th- those are end results, right, of a just system.
Mm-hmm.
People keeping what they earn,
Mm,
people getting the correct consequence for their negative actions,
mm-hmm.
punishment for their crimes,
Mm-hmm.
disappointment for their scams,
And
attempted scams,
rewards
whatever.
for their accomplishments too,
Value
right?
creation,
Yes. Yeah.
right? For being helpful, for creating value, for
Mm-hmm.
love,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
inserting more love into a society, right? So, I talked about dharma being a way of trying to align ourselves with the truth. So, in that sense, dharma is not a law given by any lawgiver. Even
Mm,
the Vedas, they're described as having been revealed. They're literally called Shruti, or that which is heard.
mm,
So it was truths that came to people through deep meditation,
mm,
introspection, and the accumulation of experiences. So, and the
mm,
Vedas are this vast compendium of, there are mantras in there for helping to control the mind. There are hymns to various deities, and those deities really reflect qualities in nature and qualities in our own minds and in our own personalities, and
mm,
and that we want to cultivate, or that we want to, understand.
mm,
There are also, formulas for how to perform a sacrifice, how to perform various actions. There's cosmology in there. The Vedas also contain numerous stories and references to gold coins, to being in debt, what is
mm,
healthy debt. Um, there's a passage written in the first person by a man who has destroyed himself through excessive gambling
mm,
and brought shame to his family, and he's learned his lesson. So that means that, not only was there gambling 5,000 years ago or more. I mean, the Vedas were written 10,000 to 5,000 years ago. And so there was gambling, which means there was money, which means there was ledger keeping, and the notion of games
mm,
and losing at games, all of that happening. So, our ancient society was probably much more sophisticated than we're really still fully aware of. But
mm,
anyway, back to this idea of justice. So dharma is not a law given by any lawgiver. So for Hindus, there's no single prophet. It's in many ways, Hinduism is not a religion in the sense that the Abrahamic religions are
mm,
religions, where there's a source, right?
mm,
Instead, dharma it's just what is. So it's like, okay, gravity goes down, right? Whether I like it or not, whether I think it should go down or not,
mm,
gravity goes down.
mm,
I've got this phone in my hand. If I don't want this phone to hit the floor, I better
mm,
put a desk under it, right, to
mm,
set it on. I still may disagree philosophically with gravity. I may have an anti-gravity ideology of some kind, whatever that is, but gravity's gravity, whether I like it or not. And some things in the world, like the laws of physics, are just true whether we like it or not. And so living in harmony with those, essentially that's dharma. And so, and karma goes along with this. There are Hindus who believe in heaven and hell and conceive of it in similar ways to the way that Abrahamic religions do. But for the most part, one thing all Hindus and Buddhists believe in is karma, which means, as I said, actions have consequences that are part of, the action. And so human laws and morality can be in alignment with dharma sometimes, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes we evolve as a society and realize that, what sounded like a dharmic rule at one point now actually causes more harm than good, right? And so we change. Gandhi did this. At the time he was coming up and first, doing satyagrahas, doing nonviolent resistance, very few Indians really thought nonviolent resistance would work. They really thought that they needed, a lot of them were looking at Lenin and saying, Lenin, the Bolshevik, a lot of the change in Russia had already happened. The Mensheviks and others had come to compromises. There was going to be a parliament. And Lenin said, no, a true revolution must have blood, And so it was one of the horrible crimes of the 20th century. And Russia did not need it. That's the thing, And so, but anyway, until Gandhi proved it, even then, a lot of people thought nonviolence was weakness. And unfortunately, even now, people think, oh, well, Gandhi, like, I don't know if you've ever listened to AM radio in East Texas while driving.
I don't know if I have either.
But sometimes you'll find a radio preacher and some radio preachers are wonderful, and it's inspiring to take a long drive and listen to it. But I remember several times hearing people saying the same thing, which is Jesus might have said, turn the other cheek, but Jesus lived in simpler times, and you can't be that way now. And turn the other cheek is dharma. It's not easy. In fact, it's very hard, right? And Jesus himself said, you've heard from the prophets that we should love your neighbor, but I'm telling you, it's not enough to just love your neighbor. Right? Even the publicans do that, right? The tax collectors even a tax collector can love his neighbor, right? I don't know. Jesus had this incredible sense of humor.
Yeah.
It's like some of those lines, like the one about, like, you're worried about the speck of dust that's in your neighbor's eye, and you've got a log sticking out your own eye.
Yeah.
Imagine that, in the original, however he said it in Aramaic, he must have had really great timing for it to be quoted, for thousands of years after that. And I mean, but anyway, I'm digressing. But I mean, it's an essential truth, that, he said it's not easy. I'm saying don't just love your neighbors, you have to love your enemies. And this goes back to this idea of love bringing out the truth. Your enemy might be your enemy today, but if he's in front of you, it's your duty as a Christian to try to turn him.
Yes.
Right. Turn him from the dark side of the force, so to speak.
Yes.
Right? And so, and this is part of justice, is not just punishment and consequence, but creating a system that incentivizes doing the right thing to begin with. Right. I mean, ultimately, what do we want? A society with a system that instantly imprisons anybody who's even thinking about committing a crime, or a society that catches people well before they become criminals and helps them to never even think of that choice. Right? It's like Bitcoin's anti-fragility, right? Hacking Bitcoin, nobody who understands Bitcoin would ever try to hack it, because there's more energy and to try to destroy it than to just help to maintain it and improve it.
That's right.
It's more lucrative to help support it, right? It's anti-fragile in the true sense. So a system of dharma means that you don't wait around for people to turn into criminals and then come down on them. You create systems where becoming a criminal is just not even a good idea. It's not
Right.
that lucrative. It brings more headaches than it's worth. And it's much easier to just be a decent person and much more fun. Yeah. And we think that's impossible now because we're all cynical, but several societies, India had apparently the historical evidence is increasing, as they keep discovering more and more, and that's why India was like 1/4 to 1/3 of the global GDP for
Yeah.
1,000 years straight until the British came, actually.
Yeah.
And it's because of the systems.
That's a
Anyway,
good.
Dharma is a huge topic, and so I'll just stop here.
If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney.
We want you to join us for 2 days of discussions and debate, which is all happening at the inaugural Dissident Dialogues 2024.
This incredible event will take place in Brooklyn on May the 3rd and 4th. You'll be joining leading thinkers such as Richard Dawkins, Steven Pinker, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, John McWhorter, Aisha Akambi, Michael Schellenberger, Mary Harrington, Chris Williamson, Winston Marshall, Konstantin Kisin, Francis Foster, and more.
Hang on a second, since when have you ever been a serious thinker?
I love thinking, it's my favourite hobby. Sometimes, of an evening, it's all I do. Think.
Moving swiftly on, we want you to join us for a gathering where everyone is part of the conversation. Conservatives, progressives, atheists, theists, left, right, and everything in between.
Dissident Dialogues presents a rare opportunity to immerse yourself in a conversation with the most influential thinkers of our time.
We'll tackle important topics relating to religion, science, politics, and culture. If you're driven by intellectual honesty, curiosity, and a desire for the truth, Dissident Dialogues is the place for you.
It's not just an event, it's the beginning of an intellectual journey, and we want you to come along for the ride. I like rides.
Dissident Dialogues is a place for dangerous ideas. Buy your tickets now at dissidentdialogues.org and be part of the conversation.
No, that's so good. I actually didn't know any of this at all. So Dharma as a law given, but not by any lawgiver. Sounds
Right.
much more like English common law, actually, right? There's a process of legal discovery that takes place over vast spans of time. We basically
Yeah.
say we've observed how people have had different types of disputes and conflicts over time. Here's how different judges and communities have resolved them. And from all of these lessons, we sort of abstract up the English common law tradition, right?
Yes.
This is contrasted with what we think of as law today, like some senator signs a thing into law. And it's like, oh, now you follow this rule that we just created, or else. That's
Yeah.
fiat law, really. That's literally do what I say or else, right? It's just generated by fiat. It's decreed into existence. But that's not really sustainable, just law, right? The sustainable, just law is, well, how have we been doing this for thousands of years? What have we really learned about ourselves, about human nature? It's a distillation process or a discovery process rather than this process of, decree and imposition.
Yeah.
And the core of natural law, if we want to use that phrase to describe that, life, liberty, property, right?
Yeah.
We honor the individual life, honor their freedom, honor their private property. And
Yeah.
so when we talk about having law that is aligned with that, I think this is a very deep perspective on Bitcoin. It's like this is the closest law we've ever written, the thing that's most in alignment with life, liberty, and property that
Yes.
we've ever had. You could call it a money, you can call it a law. I don't know. It's a system of economic exchange that has laws built into it.
Hmm.
And
It's an accurate ledger
yes,
of the memory of who created value
that's right.
for somebody,
That's
and
right.
it wants to record that and reward that, right?
Yes. Well said.
Record the value creation and reward the value creation accurately
Yes.
without any leakage, right?
And make the confiscation, to your last point, Bitcoin makes being a criminal more expensive by making
Yes,
it, by being so hard to steal. It's actually reducing the rewards for criminality while
yeah,
it records and rewards, let's say, entrepreneurship, right? The value creation process,
yeah,
and reduces the rewards for the value destruction or confiscation process. So it
yeah,
is this system that really aligns us with natural law. And it's so fascinating. It's so fast. It almost, when I look at it this way, I almost see it makes you wonder how deeply our individual life paths are a result of the incentives, the incentive structures we inhabit. It's like people will do whatever is profitable essentially. So if you make criminality,
yeah,
as you said with Dharma, make criminality less profitable, make entrepreneurship more profitable, and people will just
yeah,
flow in that direction.
yeah.
It's a pull, not a
See, and
push, to your earlier point.
it, it is a pull. And the thing is, when we're forced by the incentives, the sort of dysfunctional incentives to be a certain way, um, inside we rebel against it. So many
Hmm.
of us are facing depression or these mysterious body mind diseases like fibromyalgia and
Hmm.
fatigue, chronic fatigue, and things like that, because somewhere deep down we know that working 10 hours at a job where I just move files or data from point A to point B and then back from point B to point A, for no particular reason. You
Right.
talk a lot about bureaucracy and
Yeah.
and how bureaucracy and the institutionalization of middlemen,
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
including middlemen who just record what other middlemen are doing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We're even at that point.
So,
Eh, There's something in us that, because we're creators by
yeah.
nature, we're
Yeah.
not this other thing. We're not cogs in a factory. We're not, and the education system that, we have that was designed to create factory workers and not innovators.
Hmm.
I think we're rebelling on against that on an
Hmm.
individual level and even as a society, globally. I think
Hmm.
in fact very soon people are going to be as tired of that as they are of inflation.
Hmm. Hmm.
But
Hmm.
going back to, we talked a little bit about free markets, truly free markets.
Hmm.
If you go back to just the basic human impulse, it's, imagine that you and I both see the humanity in each other. We
Hmm.
see each other as creators, okay? So we have a system, a dharma system that of economics that allows us to do that. Then I see that I have a talent in doing one thing.
Hmm.
You have a talent in doing a different thing. And I need some of what your talent can produce. You need
Hmm.
some of what my talent can
Hmm.
produce. So are we just going to sit there and stare at each other across a divide? No. Our natural impulse will be to say, Robert, you suck at carpentry. I'm really great at it. Why don't I build the rest of your house? But you're such a great farmer. My crops aren't growing at all. Can you come please take a look at my field?
Hmm.
Right. And you say, yeah, I'll take care of your fields. You build my house.
Hmm.
And there, what do we have? Gains from trade. All the foundational elements of economics right
Hmm.
there, right? Specialization
Hmm.
and a fair pricing. Like, okay, how much
Hmm.
house building equals this much farming work?
Yes.
And how do we price that? And then how do we record that on a ledger that both of us will keep? And maybe we'll have a few other people also keep the ledger with us so that we make sure that all 5 copies are in alignment. Suddenly we've created a decentralized ledger
Yes.
right there. Out of what? basic human instincts to help. Okay, so you helped me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody helps you, what do you have naturally as an impulse? Gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Gratitude is probably the most powerful force for creating happiness as an individual, right? I mean, I start every morning by saying 3 thank yous, and I think, a lot of people talk about, the power of gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
But when we have a system that disincentivizes basic gratitude and instead incentivizes one-upmanship and, look out for yourself, don't be too nice to other people because they're never going to repay you, you know, those kind of things. It's going against human nature. And I
Yeah.
think it actually makes it sick, So
That's well said. And it's, yeah, it's a big theme explored on the show. How much does the corruption of our incentive or rule systems, legal systems, if those are corrupt, how much
yeah,
does that corrupt us? Which is
yeah,
how much are we the product of our incentives? I think it's an open question, but certainly seems to be quite important. And Dharma, this
yeah,
whole concept of Dharma is consistent with that. And
yeah,
you're describing the meaningless work, right, of the bureaucrat, this shuffling papers one side to the other, going against human nature.
yeah.
And, that word meaning, I love talking about the meaning of words, and the meaning of meaning is especially interesting. When
Hmm.
you ask a question like, what is the meaning of life? We're invoking the sense of meaning as in, what is the significance of life? What is the purpose of life? Or what is the value of life? So, my next question for you is, what is value?
Mm. So value, if you align it with this idea of artha and kama, value is let's go back to that definition of love as action aimed at the spiritual growth of another person. Now,
Mm,
we can't directly go and grow somebody else's spirit, but what we
mhm,
can
mhm,
do is help them to achieve artha and achieve kama, achieve
mm,
well-being, achieve prosperity, achieve security, achieve power of one
mm,
kind or another,
mhm,
capability of one kind or another. We can also help them achieve some enjoyment or pleasure,
mm,
right? And if I do that, if I entertain you, if I teach you, if I give you a better tool for accomplishing something that you want to accomplish,
mhm,
I've added value into your life, right?
mhm,
Now, sometimes that value added is a short-term thing. It's fast food or fast fashion that won't be, fashionable 6 months from now or a year from now,
mm,
or the latest shitcoin pump and
mhm,
dump. I'm adding value of a sort, but better would be to provide wealth or enjoyment, kama and artha over the long term. So,
mhm,
something that has lasting value that may keep going up. And then there's some things that, they give you not just wealth and well-being, not just pleasure and enjoyment, but a sense of living a life of dharma and even helping you to be liberated from illusions and attachments. So
mm,
that kind of value is probably maybe the highest or most valuable.
mm,
Examples of that might be some kind of education that really transforms someone's life, or
mm,
helping someone to achieve wealth in a way that they can deploy it effectively without being attached to it, without being dependent on it, without having to sacrifice some essential part of themselves in order to have that wealth,
mm,
to give them true, to give somebody else true financial security, financial independence, financial freedom, ownership of their own private property, right? If I'm giving somebody something that's going to be a depreciating asset that's going to be worthless in 6 months, okay, fine. I've done that.
mhm.
If I give somebody cocaine, I'm adding value in a sense, but until it wears off. I mean, and cocaine's a hugely valuable commodity around the world, right?
Mhm,
But it's one example of the great problem we face, which is that the going price for something and the actual value of it don't always match up, and this is the great
mm,
problem that we contend with, right? That
mhm,
and we worsen it by incentivizing short-term consumerism. I think economists call it time preference, right? But I hate that term because every time I use it, even when I get it right, I get confused because is it that I'm preferring to have more time and
Yeah,
therefore it's a
it's
long term time,
counterintuitive. Yeah.
or is it that I'm preferring to have it now in this time and
Yeah.
therefore I have a high time preference, meaning I have a high preference for
I
now. It should be
I
like
I
now
think
preference.
yeah, I think the spatial metaphor is the confusing part because low is good, high is bad. We should have just gone with short and
Yeah,
long, right? Like long
it
is
is.
good, short is bad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, an economy based on dharma helps us value our values,
Mm-hmm.
to put it
Mm.
bluntly. And,
Mm.
and that's not a dream for a distant, idealistic utopia.
Mm.
We've had it in the past. India had it for quite a long time, and that's
Mm.
what made it so prosperous. And
Mm.
it's why like there's so many hordes of Roman coins being discovered in India
Mm.
because a number of people, Pliny the Elder, Cicero one time apparently in the Senate said he was tired of seeing the gold of Rome being sent to India in exchange for pepper that just,
Mm. Mm.
entertains your mouth and
Mm.
has no value. Others were saying, our women are bankrupting us by demanding silks from India and perfumes, and we're sending our hard-earned gold in exchange for it, right? Yeah, so having a monopoly on things like pepper was very valuable, but more than that, it was having this economy where that allowed for, manufacture of steel and, all these innovations that started in India, not just
Mm.
zero, but a whole lot of other
Mm.
things. It was because of
Mm.
this idea of consumerism. If you ever watch this documentary called Century of the Self, it's about Sigmund Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, who's considered the father of modern PR.
Mhm.
And he created this idea that human beings could be called consumers and programmed, in a sense, through propaganda
Oh,
to
this is his
think of
book
themselves.
propaganda, right?
That's the
Yes.
one, Edward
Yeah.
Bernays, right?
Yeah.
So he devised a way to get out this idea that people could express themselves through shopping, express themselves through what they wore. And we didn't do that much before. In the 19th
Mm.
century, that there were no brands that people displayed,
Mhm.
I mean, it just wasn't, and it became a common thing. And that started around the same time that the Fed and
Mm.
fiat money started. It started the same time around which both fascist dictatorships in Europe and more centralized economies around the world, including in the United States, emerged. And so it became this useful tool of how do we get people to not rebel against their government as their government increasingly takes over control.
Mm.
We distract them by telling them to
Mm.
shop. We
Bread and
distract them by
circuses.
telling them, yeah,
Yeah.
you know, you're a consumer. And you got people to actually, people still take pride in this, like
Sure.
this company, they serve me and my needs as a consumer, right? We take pride in saying things like that. I mean, I
Mm.
used to be a CMO, so I worked in the dark side of marketing.
Mhm.
I understand how it works, and maybe that helps me not fall for it quite often, but I still, we all fall for it.
Yeah.
But the essential vision of, you know, value is not just giving people something that they will pay for
Mm.
at a good price, because people will pay for all kinds of stupid stuff they don't need.
Mm.
Value is about giving people things that make them better able to actualize their full humanity.
Wow.
In other words, not cocaine
Yeah. So
and not a
yeah,
whole lot of other stuff, right?
this is wonderfully said. So I've never thought of it this way actually, but because I usually, in a strict economic sense, thought of value as really problem solving, I guess, solutions, right? You can say value is solutions to problems. But what you're saying
It-
is, well, there's a whole spectrum of problems, right? There's
yeah,
some that are shorter time horizon, some that are longer time horizon, and that
yeah,
greater value is rendered to people when you solve longer time horizon problems. All right, the
Yeah.
cocaine might give them a, oh great, you feel good for 15 minutes, but your longer time horizon is probably really bad for you to spend a bunch of money on something
Yeah.
that satisfied you for 15 minutes and hurt you in the long run.
Yeah.
But I guess the opposite of cocaine would be something like I don't know, even creating sound money, right? For something like that, creating a sound
Yes.
money system might give
Yeah.
you a very stable, long-term way to generate solutions to problems in the long run.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and this idea of, I mean, that really is kind of the purpose of the market, actually, is it's trying to appraise value via the pricing system, right? We can't actually measure value because value is subjective, but we can
Yeah.
sort of put a number to what most people value through this competitive bid ask process. And so we can
Mhm.
stick a number to things like this is how much this solution costs to that problem.
Yeah.
And if the economy is based on dharma, right?
Yeah.
Natural law, fair rules, then we can properly value our values. And like, right, people will start to, I
Yes.
don't know, I guess think longer term. This is a time preferencing again, right? It's a longer time horizon, lower time preference.
And you've
Um,
written about this, and Stephanie in the Bitcoin Standard
mhm.
talks about in numerous ways that sound money allows people to think about their future
Yes.
with more optimism and more of a sense that it's actually going to happen.
Yeah. More
You know,
predictability. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of young people who, they're like, look at the world around me. I'm going to be dead by the time I'm 40.
Yeah. The
So don't stop me
YOLO
from having a
culture,
good time.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And it's not to say you shouldn't take risks, but take good risks.
Sure.
Take really meaningful risks, not stupid risks.
Yeah.
It stops us from having a life of real adventure as opposed to just sort of pseudo adventure.
Stops young people from having families too,
Oh yeah,
right? It's like
that's a lot too.
you can't preserve wealth and plan for the future. It's like, how are you possibly, you can't take care of yourself predictably. How are you going to take care of kids?
I think growing up in 2008 and seeing what happened to your parents, um,
Mm,
it it was a it was a formative event for this whole generation of
mm,
people who are now in their early 20s.
mm,
That whatever they told you about work hard and play by the rules and save your money and you'll get ahead. I saw people do that, and then we were nearly homeless, or
yeah.
we lost everything and we were
Yes.
homeless and we had to crawl back.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, other people were getting bailouts and rewards and everything
Yeah.
else. You can't blame somebody for doing that. And that's the thing is, you know, when you don't have accurate valuing
Hmm.
of things, remember I said, free market begins with me thinking, hey, I'm good at this and I can help
Yes.
Robert. And you
Yeah.
thinking, I'm good at this, I can help Vikram.
Hmm.
And this natural sense of what is in there, the human emotion. There's pride, right? A certain sense of I'm good at something.
Hmm.
And immediately, what do you think of? Oh, I don't. Our natural impulse isn't to say, "Oh, let me keep it secret because I don't want anybody else to find out my secrets."
Hmm.
How good, how good. It's to share. We
Hmm.
naturally think, "I'm good at this. Let me go do it for as many people as possible, and let
Yes.
them all thank me, and let me feel like a badass and wonderful and loved and appreciated and respected for what I can do." Right, and then keep getting better and better at it, and do more.
Yes.
Right. So if we don't have a system that values that in a human being and instead says, yeah, all right, you're a brilliant guitarist, or yeah, okay, you're great at design, but I need you to deliver this spreadsheet and this PowerPoint by Friday, you know. So I don't really care what else you're good at. In fact, I don't really want to know about your family. I've had CEOs say, you spend a lot of time talking to your employees. And I was like, yeah. They're like, doesn't that make it hard? I'm like, hard to do what? Hard to fire them.
Wow.
And
Such
I
a
was like,
fiat mindset.
I was like, yeah, it does make it hard to fire them, and that's what makes for a healthy culture.
Yeah.
And I hope someday you figure that out. But so, but see, when you have a system where you yourself aren't allowed to know your full value, that's when the bullies of the world come in and
Yeah.
say, you know what, I'll tell you what you're worth.
Uh, huh.
And or I'll give you meaning. Join my political party. I'll
Right.
give you meaning. Come to this rally where we're going to say that immigrants are the source of all our problems.
Right.
I'll give you meaning. You go back and stop trying to work out in the world. You're best, defined as a wife and mother staying
Yeah.
home, you know. And if you're bullied enough, you'll fall for it.
Right.
If nobody's ever told you, no, in fact, you're equally capable as anybody else.
Wow. That is so well said. I'm reminded of, the root word of authority being author, right? And that
Oh,
old
yeah.
saying, if you don't write and live out your own story, then you're going to get written into someone else's story.
Yes.
And this idea
Yes.
that, a lot of this, I think what we're touching on here is, again, it's that idea of the centralization or corruption of money, right? It gives
Mm,
one group of people more authority over another group of people than would otherwise be possible. So it
yeah.
actually changes that authorship of one's own life in a way that, instead of that person being a creator, they're pushing papers as a bureaucrat or whatever the circumstances may
Yeah.
be. And so again, back to that Dharma, fair rules, natural law, we could insert sound money here, right? That was kind of
Yeah.
that's what emerged naturally. That is fair rules that emerge
It is
naturally.
because every single penny, every single Satoshi of that sound money, at the very least, reflects the truth that this some value was created and given to somebody
Yes,
else in exchange. Now, that value might have been cocaine and, something awful. That
sure.
value might have been some life-changing service
Hmm.
or something in between. But, this is where, Hinduism tends to respect these natural processes that
Hmm.
you really can't get people to change by just telling them they should or just telling them you're going to hell if you don't. You know,
Hmm.
what you need to do is give people a chance to discover or their own inner self-respect on a deep
Yes.
level. And that sometimes requires, you talked about love before. Love is also that patience, to let
Yeah.
somebody grow into themselves. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's a very hard thing to do,
Yeah. No, there's a great verse in the Bible about that, right? Love is patient, love is kind. I can't
Yes.
recite it from heart, but yeah, it's great
Yes.
point. And so we're, I think, continually touching on these cascading consequences of unevenly applied rules, which is like which is my working definition of corruption, right? Rules for thee, not for me, kind of thing. There's
Yeah.
apartheid, right? A two-tiered rule system.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and we could say unsound money, right? Which is basically that. There's rules for you're either a money printer or you're a victim of inflation, right? It's like two different
Yeah.
tiers of the rule system.
Yeah.
And so a function of money in the on the topic of value is to be a store of value. But when you get centralized or corrupt money, you have money that does not store value, and it has all these cascading consequences on our time preference, on society, on the authorship of our lives. Um, which is a segue into my next question for you and the namesake of the show.
Yeah.
What is money?
It is, and I've heard you say that you've done so many hundreds of episodes, and you're still not sure exactly what the answer to that question is. And for in Vedic culture, you go back all the way to the Rig Veda, and it mentions gold coins, as I said, debt, gambling. So money, it was a sophisticated society that had money, and in use in a variety of good and bad respects.
Hmm.
And and at some point double entry bookkeeping, well before Luca Pacioli. And so that was also there. And that's also the idea of negative and positive credit and debit was also there. And just as in Thank God for Bitcoin in your book, that it talks about, Jesus referring to debts and the Bible often referring to, making whole of debts and things like that as a metaphor for spiritual concepts, right?
Yeah.
So one basic thing that's in there in the Veda is that money should be earned through legitimate means. And what legitimate means is, so, okay, you talked about meaning, like the meaning of life.
Yes.
An interesting double meaning. So this word artha, A-R-T-H-A, I've talked about it several times. It's defined as wealth or well-being, prosperity, all of those. But artha actually also means meaning. Like the artha of a word is the meaning of a word. Or the artha of an action is the meaning of an action. So even like sometimes if I was babbling, my mother would say in Tamil, "You're speaking without artha. Artha milama pesre." Which means you're just talking without making any sense. I mean, it's just a thing that mothers will say to say, "Stop babbling. You're not making any sense." But there are also references in literature to actions taken that had no meaning, a death that had no meaning, and we see that in all sorts of literature. And so artha, there's a saying there's an economics textbook that was written. It was a manual for an emperor. It's called the Artha Shastra, which literally means the manual for creating a society, a prosperous society. And it was written by a man named Kautilya, who was the chief minister or first minister to the emperor Chandragupta. And Chandragupta, this is around the time when Alexander tried to invade India. And Chandragupta the Maurya Empire emerged out of that period. So it was a very global society. They were trading with the Greeks. They'd been trading with Mesopotamia and the Arabian Peninsula and East Africa for a long time with Egypt. So this was a global society with tremendous trade and a very robust economy. And he wrote this Arthashastra, but he used the double meaning. One of the most famous lines is that wealth without meaning is useless. And it was his instruction to the young emperor saying, do not yourself try to become wealthy through meaningless actions. And do not allow your subjects to ever become wealthy through meaningless actions. Respect them all as value creators, and you yourself do your duty of creating value in the lives of your subjects, or else you're not worthy of being emperor. And he was very blunt about it to the emperor. He said, this is how you will fail if you do this, this, and this. So there was no yes-manship or coddling of the emperor. He was very straight in it. And that's what makes it a classic now. And I hope it'll be studied more. Even in economists now in India are studying it more, and the Indian government is studying it more, because it was the blueprint for an economy that was profoundly wealthy, and at the same time was the birthplace of multiple religions, the expansion of Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism, a whole lot of traditions, and also a culture that sheltered Jews from before the destruction of the temple, a culture that welcomed St. Thomas the Apostle in the year 52 and created a Christian community that was part of the larger Hindu community for centuries. So India accepted Christianity about 200, almost 300 years before Europe did, before Constantine. Right? Because Constantine was around 320 or so. And it was only after that the first English Christian king was Alfred in like 950 or something like that. And by then Christianity had been there for 900 years in India. And so it was a society that valued spiritual life, protected it, promoted it, provided a home to the Jews where, Jews have been in India for more than 2,000 years, and there's never faced anti-Semitism. And you might say that's separate, that's a cultural thing, but you've pointed this out many times. Sound money and the principles, the valuing of human beings as value creators is what creates sound money. Because sound money is this, it's a ledger, as we said, to record, to remember, and reward helpful, creative actions by each other, right? If I create value, I don't want it to be forgotten. If you did something for me, I want the chance to repay you. I want the chance to thank you. I want the chance to appreciate you. I want us together to create a community in which we all feel like, hey, I'm part of building something. I'm part of creating something. I'm a citizen. I'm a patriot. I want to defend this good thing that we're creating together. Aren't these all principles that create a sound money and a healthy economy? Yes. Right.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, when you put it that
So you
way,
can have that on a village level, but you can
yeah,
have it on a nation level or a global level.
just promoting those people that are engaging in useful actions, right? That are doing, I guess, this is positive karma, right? They're actually
Yeah.
doing things that are useful and helpful for others. They are promoted in society and
Mhm.
therefore emulated, right, by others. So you're actually
Yeah.
creating a healthy societal dynamic through sound money, right? Versus unsound money where you're doing the reverse. You're rewarding the plunderers, the statesmen,
Yes.
um, the bureaucrats, for instance, those that are
Yeah.
not creating value. And that's obviously creates the reverse dynamic. Right?
Yes. And worse, this goes back to freedom.
Mm,
Along with that, we're also suppressing, well, for one thing, we're suppressing the full power of half the population,
yeah.
right? I think one time I wrote this on, and maybe I tweeted it, something like that. But I said, if half the human population is spending half of its energy keeping down the other half,
Right.
then really we're running at 1/4 power at best in
Exactly.
terms of our human potential,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there's all these estimates that if you allowed women just equal access to the systems of justice and equal access to credit, basic,
Yeah.
basic human rights, economic rights, that trillions of dollars of value would be unleashed,
Yeah.
right? Liberated,
Yeah.
freed. But we say, well, we've never seen a woman do that before. We don't know if women are capable of this or that. We don't know a lot of things,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't mean that it's not possible. It's the height of stupidity to say it's never been done before and therefore it's not possible.
Every man takes the limits of his field of vision for the limits of reality, is what Schopenhauer said. Yeah.
That's right. And we do this. Sometimes I look out the window and I see I've got skyscrapers lit up now, and also these low income neighborhoods. Some would call them not quite slums, but
Yeah.
they're poorer folks. They're
Yeah.
folks who drive auto rickshaws and clean other people's houses
Yeah.
and jobs like that. And I know that some of them are struggling, and people are having whatever difficulties they're having in each of these windows. But then I think whatever they're going through, the women are probably going through it worse, and the girls
Mm,
are going through it worse.
mm.
And it feels to me, I guess I'm getting a little emotional here, but sometimes I feel like there's this great ongoing crime happening all around us, nonstop, and we're just so used to it having been there in the background of our lives that we don't
Mm.
even realize that it's happening. But imagine if every girl at the age of 10 could learn this is how you save and invest and achieve financial freedom or
Mm.
financial security enough
Mhm.
that you can walk away from a man who beats you.
Mm.
You can, go and live on your own and earn an income, and save for the future and be secure.
Mhm.
You know, the world would be a much different place. So, but that's one of the reasons I'm drawn to Bitcoin. I think it gives us a better
Yeah.
chance of freeing everybody, freeing men to see women that way and freeing women and girls to see themselves that way and express it.
Yeah, the putting people on, at least in a system where the rules are evenly and fairly applied, I think
Yeah.
again incentivizes us to treat one another's as equals. That doesn't, I'm not saying equality of outcome, equality of opportunity, but equality in the eyes of the law, right? Equality of souls, right? A moral equality. Um, I think a just economic system certainly supports that, in my view.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So we process income again, right?
yes,
Everybody should have access to the same process and chance,
yes,
right? And then talking about Hinduism, I'm in Mumbai right now. There are temples to goddesses all around me, and in people's houses, in my house, the goddess Lakshmi, it's
hmm,
right here. And at the same time, people who worship goddesses will not see the goddess in the women in their lives, right?
hmm,
And s- so that's one of those where pricing and value are not lined up. Our
yes, yes,
evaluation of the value and the actual value are not in alignment, and that means that we're not free. We're actually
yes.
living inside of an illusion,
There's an illusion,
right?
right? And
Yeah, and we're slaves to that.
the way you described that earlier, how there's this pervasive ongoing crime that's been normalized, right? That
Yeah,
we've been so conditioned to it, we don't see it anymore. That's an equally accurate description of central banking, right? It's like there's this, we all use fiat currency, we all think it's normal. Just print
yeah,
the money, whatever, that's what always happens. But that is this giant crime as well. And it's supporting, like, again, if women had, say, we're on a Bitcoin standard and they had access to unconfiscatable sound money, well, then women
yeah.
would be much more empowered to leave these abusive relationships.
Yes.
Um,
And as you said, it's one of those quiet things where it's pulled and it's permissionless. Like,
yeah.
I think it will happen. I think at some point, I hope that very quietly, a whole lot of women will just download one app or another, whether it's
Mm,
ZebPay or something else, and they'll just start slowly acquiring a
yeah.
little bit of their sound money and their freedom. And no patriarchy is going to be able to stop them from it.
Yeah.
Not the Taliban, not anybody else.
Right.
And when that happens, I think there's a tipping point where suddenly we realize, oh my God, this much Bitcoin is in the hands of this many millions of women and girls.
Mm, hmm.
And they're not going to trade it for Shiba Inu or anything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
They're holding it,
Yeah.
right? And so now they're a force to be contended with.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great liberating force for the individual ultimately. But to your point, I think
Yeah.
that there are certain individuals that have been more oppressed than others. And, what's the old saying? It's a man's world, right? That men have had this
Yeah.
power advantage over women for a long time. And maybe Bitcoin
Yeah.
tilts the scales a little bit on that.
Mm.
Um, so one thing money does is that it conveys prices, as we've talked about. Prices are exchange ratios of goods. So instead of, pricing cars in terms of houses or vice versa, we price everything in terms of money. So it simplifies communication
Yeah.
and therefore makes economics and economies run more smoothly. So, in other words, money is a tool of economic rationality, right? Ratio is the root word of
Yeah.
rationality. It is this means of comparing
Yeah.
and contrasting things that we
Yeah.
use for sound judgment, right? And how to
Hmm.
decide how to act in the world.
Yeah.
This is another very important word I think about a lot. So I have to ask you, what is rationality?
Mm. So uh, I'll start by there's a context for uh Hindus and Buddhists, anybody outside of, I think, the European church background that's different. And that is there, as I said, there was no Cartesian divide.
Hmm.
There's no, keep your science out of my religion and I'll keep my
Right.
religion out of your science.
And this is the fundamental mind matter subject object divide, right? When you say Cartesian divide. It
is.
I think, therefore I am. I think
It
were his words. Yeah.
yeah. So Descartes was part of all that, but it's called this, and I think it's actually one of those stories that's not actually true. That somehow he was influential in persuading certain church bishops to agree that scientists could proceed with their science as long as they don't make any pronouncements on the existence of God or any religious things. And in exchange, the church would not interfere if you said that the earth goes around the sun and any other things like that.
Got it. Okay.
So it was that. So whether it's Cartesian or not, it's that division between science and religion that scientists should consider religion to be superstition, and religious people should consider science to be somewhat suspect and godless, right? Even now we have this, that evolution is godless, and people will object to that.
Yeah.
For Hindus, that argument makes no sense. Evolution is the divine process.
Thank you. It's never made sense to me either. I'm like, well, how are these at odds?
Okay. And so, because it never came, so mathematics, so from the original Vedas, various sciences were also initially taught and continue to be taught as spiritual pursuits. So you may have heard of Ayurveda, which is a traditional medicine. Ayurveda is based on the Vedic concepts of what the human being is and how energy flows and all of that. But it's a science of medicine and surgery, astronomy, math, science, the making of steel. All these things were done by deeply religious people. There are very few atheists involved. And even the atheists, the thing is, for Hindus, atheism is also a valid spiritual path, because from a Hindu perspective, you're not rejecting the idea that there is some divine, there is some ultimate power. You're not rejecting the idea that there's a Brahman, an unknowable final, truth. You're not saying that, okay, gravity may have gone down this many times, but that's just a fluke, and next time gravity may go up, so I'm going to drop my phone and see. Right? Atheism doesn't mean being an idiot. What it means is, for in the Vedas, it means saying, I'm going to choose to pursue my spirituality without the practice of worshiping a deity. I will do it through other means, through logical argument, through meditation, through yoga, through other things. I will attempt to find the divine within myself and not give it any particular name. And that may be a phase I go through for 5 or 10 years, and then I will come to a point where I decide, okay, now the name I'm going to use is Rama, or now the name I'm going to use is Jesus, or now, the name I'm going to use is whatever. And so you may end up being someone who worships a deity, but you'll do it with a certain perspective that, okay, this deity, this form that I'm worshiping, this story that I'm aligning myself with or using, that's a way to align myself with the ultimate truth. Okay, so anyway, so all of that said, money, economics was a spiritual practice. And it had the same goal as meditation or yoga, which is connect people to their inner divinity. And so rationality, since logic is part of religious life for Hindus, and it's not separate. Like in the West, a lot of times for logic, we go to the Greeks originally, and we go to certain, sometimes very openly atheistic, philosophers who, really were not religious at all. But in India, it's very hard to find those. Even the atheists are quite spiritual among Indian philosophers. So, but there is this word viveka, and viveka just means, sometimes the word discrimination is used, but that's a tricky word. What it means is the ability to discern the difference between what is real and what is not real. So it's a very fundamental rationality of, is this real or is it an illusion?
Essential for moksha, I would imagine.
It is, because, and so one spiritual practice is simply to negate things one by saying not this, not this. It's a meditation. It's called neti. Neti is Sanskrit for not this.
Hmm.
Meaning, okay, I have just, okay, Bitcoin's rallying, right? So I've just become one of the 1% thanks to my investment in Bitcoin. So now I'm happy? No, that happiness is not real. That's just an illusion based on what society has told you about having money. Okay, then if that's not real, then maybe what other people think of me is making me happy. No, that's also not real. Okay, then at least I'm very well educated. You say, well, okay, but that's not really who you are. Being wealthy, being well liked, being educated, these are all things that you can show to the world. These are things that are next to you, the things that you have possession of, but that's not the real you. And you think, okay, well, I'm a creative musician. Is that the real me? And you say, no, that's even not real. That's just a thing you do. And so by this sort of process, you come to, okay, I am this set of desires. No, even your desires are not real. I am this set of qualities. No, even those qualities are not the ultimate truth of you. And so you come finally to settle in deep meditation on shunya, actually, on zero, on this void that is not exactly a void, because so, and so rationality is a process of, in more practical terms, let me put it bluntly, not being fooled by the BS of either you or somebody else to see what is real and what is not real. Okay. The same way that, like I often think, that fiat printed money versus money that was actually, a certain amount of the money in circulation now comes from value creation by human beings, right? But then an additional amount of it's been adulterated by money that's just been printed freely, created by banks as part of this
without work.
Right? Yeah. So it's sort of like, let's say I'm a farmer and I grow some wheat and I have a sack of wheat, but then somebody comes along and puts 30% sawdust in it and starts to sell it as whole wheat flour, right? It's not real wheat. Okay. And to a certain point, I can sell it. I can get people to eat it. If they're hungry enough, they'll buy it. Yeah. And I can think, well, look at that. I'm feeding all these people. Nobody's complaining. Yeah, they're crapping sawdust and they're getting a little bit of sickness, but at least they're not hungry, right? And I'm getting rich. So what's wrong with this? Okay. And it takes somebody to come in and say, yeah, they're not hungry and you're getting rich, and the farmer's also producing wheat and the sawmill owner is also getting paid. But there's something wrong here. This is not a real way to run an economy. So, and it's that fundamental thing. The term is viveka, which means the ability to distinguish between what's real and what's not real.
Discernment, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow,
and then from that, all logical proofs kind of go. It's Elon Musk and others have called it first principles.
Yeah.
Right. You go back to if gravity always goes down, then X, and then if that, then X, and if that, then so.
Right. That's fantastic. Yeah, so it's very axiomatic in that way, right?
Yeah.
It's something
it is. And so the goal is to distinguish what is the solid foundation of your later proofs, right? If your solid foundation is, well, men are inherently superior to women, right? Or Indians are better than Europeans at this or that.
Yeah.
Then you've got a shaky foundation. You're not basing
it's irrational. I love that you said that, actually, because
it's irrational.
Racism is fundamentally irrational. Sexism is fundamentally irrational, right? If you say men are inherently better than women, well, you never get an Ayn Rand, right? Who's the greatest author of all time, as far as I can tell, at least in her sphere. And it just, humans are, as you said earlier, we are value creators, and we are self-directed individuals, right? We are self-sovereign. And if you honor that reality, you at least create the conditions for amazing things to happen. You're not going to cause things to happen, but if you limit that reality, well, then you are limiting human potential. And it was fun that not this meditation you described, how closely that aligns to the scientific method, actually, at least the empirical scientific method, is it's just a methodology of disconfirming things, right? Proving things that aren't true. And whatever you
Yes.
can't disconfirm is sort of, confirmed for now until it can be
Yes.
disconfirmed. And that is
Yeah.
science. So science is this via negativa process of cutting away
Mhm.
all of the, well, you used the example of wheat earlier. I guess we're separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, and seeing
Yes.
what resists our discernment, and whatever is left over is science for now. But, it's always subject to
Yes.
be undermined later by,
Yes.
we thought Newtonian physics were the law, and then Einstein comes along, and then
Yeah.
quantum comes along, so there's always
Right.
this, it's always provisional in that way.
Processes of deduction are kind of at the core of almost any system
Yes,
of logic. Yeah.
yes,
Including Hindu and Greek. Yeah.
yeah. And then, well, then there's the other direction too, though, is when you find those axioms, right? Those unshakable axioms, you
Yeah.
can build theorems on top of them, right? You can go bottom up, I guess, instead of cutting down to the bottom, you can find the bottom and then build on top of that. And that's how we have things like
Yeah.
mathematics and logic and
It is.
Austrian
Well,
economics.
if you're a Star Trek fan, what's that thing that Spock says when you've ruled out everything except the impossible, then what remains must be the truth, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so this is also a way of advancing because if you've ruled out all the conventional ways that you used to think about something as not applying to the situation or the mystery that you're looking at right now, then the only remaining solution would be something you've never thought of before,
Yes.
right? And this is how we advance. Anytime we see a puzzle,
Yes, yes, yes.
we try everything we know to solve the puzzle. None of those keys fits the lock.
Yeah.
So we think, okay, this
Yeah.
is a lock we've never seen before. We need a key that we've never tried before.
Yeah.
And
And
then
it
and then and then you have the Wright brothers flying, right?
exactly. Yeah, I was going to bring that up earlier, where if we said that, oh, well, we've never seen that before, well, then Wright brothers would have never gotten off the ground, right? It's like
Yeah.
that's not a valid claim. Like I
Yeah.
also was frustrated by this when I used to work in business as a CFO, when people would always say, that's the way we've always done it. I'd be like, well, that's the thing you need to look at first, like the way you've always done it.
Yes.
Of course, it doesn't mean that it's wrong, but it is something to always look at your assumptions, right? That's where you're going to find the
Yeah.
solutions to the bigger problems.
Yeah.
Um, pre-Copernicus, like, oh, well, of course the sun goes around the earth. Look at it. There it goes again, rising and falling,
Hmm.
rising and falling, rising and falling. And it takes someone like Copernicus to come along armed with mathematics to say, hey, actually,
Yes.
guys, you need to invert that perspective. That's the truth.
The thing is, Robert, in India, they knew that for several centuries before
Mm,
Copernicus. They had already calculated the distance and to the sun within an order of magnitude. So it was
wow.
one of those things that, again, freedom to
Yes, yes.
to explore ideas. There's no force holding people back from saying that the Earth is round, which actually
Yes.
Ptolemy knew. So
Yes.
it
Yeah.
was within the
Yeah.
European sphere, right?
Yeah.
And Europe sort of willfully forgot it and then
Yeah.
had to be re-reminded of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sailor talked about that in our series too. I forgot the statue of the individuals holding the round world, but it's well before Columbus, obviously.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I yeah, that's fascinating. So I guess you said earlier the Indian numbers, like we call them the Hindu Arabic numeral system, but even the
Yeah.
Arabic people in that region called them the Indian numbers. So
The Arabs
India,
were the intermediaries for
right?
that's how
They came
Europeans got.
west on the Silk Road, right?
Yeah. Yes, Europeans got,
Yes.
because the Arabs were very savvy. They did not want to give up their control of the trade from India. So there's a
Of
wonderful
course.
book called Holy Wars. Holy Wars. It's about Vasco da Gama and the Portuguese attempt to go around Africa to get to India,
Mm,
and how for centuries before that, um, so the Romans traded with India freely. The Greeks had finally learned from Indian sailors how to use the monsoons, which is a closely guarded secret for many centuries. Because the Indians didn't want foreigners basically knowing how to get to India with warships. And so they wouldn't teach them how to use the monsoons. And then finally the Greeks figured it out, but they never came with war. They just came with trade because, it was more lucrative. The Romans used Greek and Arab sailors. And then after Rome fell, Europeans gradually just stopped trying. And instead, the Venetians were able to, trade effectively with Arab and Persian traders. So at a huge markup, the Arabs would go to India, get spices, silks, and everything, and bring it back. The Venetians would then, at an even greater markup, go and sell it to the rest of Europe. And a few other intermediaries, rose and fell at various times in history like that. But it got to the point that India became this distant, mythical, forgotten place. The Romans knew India very well. Like, was it Claude, somebody is a second century Roman Christian scholar who talked extensively about the parallels with Buddhism. He had studied Buddhism. So they were quite aware of Buddhist thought and Hindu thought. And there was most likely an Indian community in Alexandria, Egypt, trading and also, studying at the library there. So, and then it was all forgotten to the point where Europeans, they believed all these myths, and it's a minor miracle that Portugal somehow managed to get to India and reestablish the trade there. So, but you can look at sound money economics and lack of sound money, like the debasing of currency and the clipping of currency. That was all part of the background of why Rome fell.
Of course.
And
Also
why
Bitcoin standard.
the denarius remained uncorrupted for longer in Byzantium.
Right.
And continued to be in Arabia and those kingdoms for longer. They held on to sound gold for longer, and that also gave them the advantage. As traders.
That's wonderful. And then, the Silk Road, right? The trade network that connected East and West. This, I think, emphasizes the importance of money as a common language of human action, and that not only did goods and services travel across that road, ideas, but fundamental, like the mathematics came across that road and came into European culture. Europeans resisted it, right, ideologically, institutionally, but it was such a useful idea that it still wins out over time. And had we not had the medium of money to connect the Silk Road, then those ideas may have remained isolated, right? It is economic exchange that becomes ideological exchange as well.
And this is where money and spirituality should not be seen as opposite to each other or, mutually, damaging. Okay. Because if real money represents real value created for each other, and real gratitude and rewarding of that value creation, what's more spiritual than that? For for beings that have to live in a material world, eating and doing things and having hands and work to do, the only spiritual way to live in that sense is to create real value out of kindness and creativity for one another. And then keep an accurate ledger of it. So we make sure that we don't miss out on, hey, that person's really good at that. Let's not forget it. Let's make sure that person stays, with a roof over her head and food, so that next time we need her to do this, she'll be around and available.
Creating a social reality rooted in love and truth, right?
Yes. And so, not that the Silk Road was, just a flow of love and truth all the way back and forth.
Sure.
But it gave a better chance for one of those travelers along the caravan to also have a copy of, this book or that book, or to also be somebody who had studied mathematics and could pass this on to somebody else. Of course.
Yeah, it's by all means, we're not saying, oh, when the Silk Road was occurring, everything was nonviolent and kumbaya. But it's almost like this story of us emerging into rationality, or rationality emerging in us, maybe. But it began with economic rationality. Or I don't know if it began, but at least that's what drove its proliferation.
Every time we kind of finally accept that there's a certain fundamental truth that we can't escape.
Yeah.
And that, karma has, actions have consequences, and those consequences are inescapable. You keep doing kind things for people, it's inescapable that you're going to be liked and rewarded and valued and kept around. As much as you want to be an introvert, people are going to come knocking on your door because you're good at that and you're kind and you're helpful. And that's as much a basic principle of life as gravity goes down.
Yes.
And then when we base an entire system around keeping that as the fundamental principle, that's when you have healthy, sound money and sound economics.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. I think even, I don't know when this transition occurred, but there was a time when science was called natural philosophy.
Yeah.
And maybe this is post-Cartesian split. We started to have this idea that science is somehow separate from other domains, right? Well, in the East, I think still to this day, right, philosophy and religion are almost the same thing, if not indistinguishable. When you look at something like Taoism, right, like, well, it's a philosophy, but it's also kind of a religion. It's one and the same. So I guess it's this Cartesian split that implies rationality and religion are fundamentally separate or at odds with one another. But there was a time maybe before that that's not true, as you're describing, that logic and rationality are intrinsic to spirituality, religion, perhaps. So my next question, you've defined rationality for us. What is religion?
So let me just, there's one thing about what you said about the separating logic and science and on the one side and religion. I think it has to do with, the idea of faith, which sometimes, we have to have faith without a logical basis for having it. We take leaps of faith sometimes. And so particularly in religious life, a lot of times people are asked to just believe, and not question. And we want to also. And maybe that's because we're going on a hunch or maybe some deeper sort of understanding inside of us. There are a lot there there are logics that are, maybe not from the frontal cortex of our brain, that we could, write out as an if-then proposition.
Sure.
But, for example, I'm a trader, and if you talk to floor traders in Chicago, back in the day, there's a great book called The Hour Between Dog and Wolf about this. It's about how, even neuroscience will support the idea that if you've seen patterns enough times, your intuition actually has a statistically higher chance of reacting correctly on a trade than if you thought it through logically.
Right.
And so it's not that there's a complete divide. And it's true that it's different in Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism, but that's partly because, and this comes to your what is religion thing. Religion in certain traditions has to do with joining a group and in one way or another having an in-group and an out-group, that we're defined by these practices and this set of beliefs and this teacher or this prophet or this origin story, whatever it is, right? And so that's not to say that it's necessarily we're superior or we're other. I think, a lot of times people say that in a negative way towards the Abrahamic faiths, that, they look down on other religions. I'm not sure that's always true. Many of my friends are Christian and my family as well. And I've been reading the Bible since I was a little kid. And there's nothing inherent in that says, being a Christian is superior to being something else. Right. And you see, even Jesus, he was in Matthew 5, he cautions against judging, of course. But then where is it? Like John 12:40. I'm showing my very limited ability to quote chapters and verses, but there's one that I like. I think it's John 12:47. He says, "And for those who hear me and believeth me not, I judge them not, because I came to," and I understand that the word is either save or help, depending on which translation you use. But I came to help, not to judge. And that's what Jesus said. And from the Indian context, see, St. Thomas came and he was welcomed by Brahmin Hindu priests who saw him as, just a scholar who was the student of a great guru and worthy of being heard and supported. And he received support from Hindu communities and kings in order to, what limited history we have, probably he received ships and support so that he could go on to Southeast Asia and South China also to preach the gospel and then come back. But he did all of this. There's no evidence that Thomas said, "I'm establishing a church to which you must now belong and forswear all of your pagan ways."
Right.
There was nothing like that.
Right.
Instead, he said, "I had this teacher named Jesus, and this is what he taught." And so there's a church in India called the Marthoma Church, and they use the Gospel of Thomas. They don't reject it the way that I think it was Bishop Irenaeus of Lyon, who famously was given the task of go through these Gospels and pick something like that. And a whole lot of other Gospels which have value to anybody who isn't afraid to look at them, and the Gnostic traditions. I guess me being a Hindu, I'm allowed to just look at wherever I want. So I don't feel any guilt at studying the Gospel of Thomas.
Well,
But Thomas has very little of his own insertions.
yeah.
It's just basically a student who took very careful notes of everything Jesus said
Yeah.
and passed them on. And so for Hindus who heard that, it was in keeping with a very long tradition of thousands of years of gurus
Yeah.
who came with a message that was very similar, but also similar to what the Bhagavad Gita says and what others said and Buddha taught, but also with its own uniqueness to it.
Yeah.
Love your enemies is a
Right.
powerful message.
Yes.
So, but Hindus and even today, you will see statues of Jesus and Mary with flower garlands around them and incense burning and people lighting a lamp and doing this circling 3 times and praying the same way that a Hindu might pray to Ganapati or Shiva or any other deity, but they're praying to Jesus. And you might look and say, oh, that's a Christian, but then later find out, no, that's actually a Hindu who's just worshiped Jesus all her life. Or no, that's a Muslim and they do that every year at this time. And so for missionaries who came to India in later years, after the Portuguese and then the British came, they would try to convert people. But, imagine the Portuguese coming thinking, okay, we're going to bring Christianity to India. Okay. And you're Vasco da Gama and his soldiers, and you land and you're the preachers who came with him. And you say, we bring you word of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. And the Indians say, oh, that's great. Would you like to see one of our 1,000-year-old churches? Would you like to meet some of our Christian community? And they're like, what, you already have it? And they're like, yeah, we had it before you did. And so what did the Portuguese proceed to do? The Inquisition. They destroyed as much of native Indian Christianity as they could, including, dancing was not a Christian tradition anymore in Europe, although it had been. But classical dance is a way of worship in India. Dancers are part of temple worship. And so there was a long tradition of Christian dance and music, which was destroyed. And in fact, there was a Catholic priest named Father Francis Barbosa here in India. He revived the Christian dance traditions to great controversy until finally the Catholic Church itself said, no, this is your ministry. Your ministry is through dance. And we sanction it. And so he was able to do that. And his biggest supporters were Hindus. So I'm just rambling a little bit to give you an idea of how religious life in India is kind of constantly flowing. And you'll find people who are devout Hindus who go to their favorite church and pray, and who have a picture of Jesus or Mary in their home temple shrine where they do puja, and who will read the Sermon on the Mount as well as the Bhagavad Gita. I was raised in that kind of house and that kind of community. So, so in those ways, sometimes Western scholars say that Hinduism is not a religion in the way that Abrahamic religions are. There's no founder, there's no single ideology to which you either conform or don't. There's no single deity or name for it, right? So instead, I think of Hinduism or Vedic culture as kind of a recognition. The same way that Dharma is not rules imposed by a lawgiver, but just a recognition of what is, right? That a recognition there is an ultimate truth, that we are part of that ultimate truth, and that our happiness and purpose in life comes from discovering that unity with the ultimate. And if a religion or a philosophy or an economic system can help us do that, then it upholds Dharma, and it should be respected, whether it's Islam or Christianity or anything else. So the Vedas, they're actually not a single text from a single source. The Vedas are actually an anthology of different cultures, mantras, and hymns. And it probably has its origins in cultures spreading all the way from as far west as Ukraine and Syria and the Middle East all the way east to Southeast Asia and South China.
Wow.
Different ways of meditating, different hymns to different deities, different cosmologies, different philosophical statements, different stories, and different methodologies for performing sacrifices, mainly fire sacrifices. And fire sacrifice was a common thing in all cultures, in Rome, in Greece, in Egypt. India is the one place where we still do it pretty much the same way we did 5,000 years ago. And the Vedas are they were an anthology because the idea was, so put it this way, religion at a certain point in time was a necessary tool for survival. And this, what I mean is this: 10,000, 12,000, 20,000 years ago, it was the end of the last ice age, right? And we know 20,000 years ago, there was a vibrant religious life in certain parts of have you ever heard of Gobekli Tepe?
Yes,
This temple
yeah.
in
Through
Turkey, in what's now
yes.
right? 20,000 years old, very clearly shown through carbon dating and other kinds of dating. But the people who built it were hunter-gatherers, not established farmers. There's no city around it. There's no community around it. They built a temple in which to do whatever it is they did at that temple, based around some kind of religion, which we can only get hints because they have these amazing statues and carvings of animals and people and things like that. So, but if you've just come through a time when there were maybe 200,000, 300,000 humans on the planet, and there was an ice age, and there were predators all around you, and you're in a cave and with your 15 or so people, and you're surviving the cold, you're surviving the predators, and you haven't seen any other humans of any species, maybe no Neanderthals, no anybody, for a few years, okay? Now imagine in our modern life, think of how you have to motivate yourself on a Monday morning to get up out of bed and get
right.
Think of how you have to motivate yourself to have a tough conversation with somebody, or motivate yourself to go to the gym. Now imagine that you're living at the end of the ice age. You don't know the ice age ending. So you're living in this hostile environment with a small group of people. And for all you know, you're the last humans on Earth who you don't even know the extent of, right? You just know that as far as you wander and your ancestors wandered, there was still more forest and more predators and all of this. You need mantras and prayers and hymns and ways to take the confidence that you want to have, that deep sense of, I belong on this earth. It's okay for me to have been born. I'm made to do something for at least these others in my clan, and we will survive. We weren't born as a mistake that just needs to die at the hands of some predator. We were born for something, at least to love one another until we can have some kind of happy life together and pass on our genes, right? So for that, you need mantras. You need ways of securing your mental focus and confidence. You need a way to sense that there's something larger than you that's supporting you, that's going to protect you, right? So the Vedas are an anthology of that. But the thing about the Vedas is they're so profound in their insight into human nature and cosmology. You know, the idea that matter and energy are interchangeable. It's there, right? E equals MC squared in everything except the equation, right? And so our ancestors may have lived in caves and not had, electricity, but they were smarter than we were in a lot of ways. So I'm going on a little too long, but let me just point out that the reason why the Vedas are a compendium of different cultures is, at that time, at least in this area of the world, there was no instinct to say, well, which one of these is the one true religion?
Right.
Instead, it was, you have a powerful mantra and you have this story which inspires me. Let's make sure we don't forget that. You have a way of chanting that uplifts me, alters my mental state, and puts me into a powerful mental condition so that I can brave whatever odds I face. Teach me how to chant in that way. Teach my people this, and let's remember it together. And so you have, for example, in the Vedas, references to chariots, and the chariot as a metaphor for the mind, and the restless mind being the four horses of a chariot, and the meditator being the one who controls those horses the same way that a good chariot driver will control his horses and send them in the direction he wants to go. Okay, that metaphor appears in various passages of the Vedas, but we know from history that chariots were only used in certain parts of the world at that time. So people had the metaphor of the chariot even before they had actual chariots. A long time ago. So they were the same way the Silk Road passed ideas. There were ideas being passed through these communities, probably 50,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. And it was about, I mean, what greater value can you create than to give somebody a way to not be afraid in life, right? And to feel that they have purpose. And so that's why, it's why any one of our religious traditions that does that is worthy of being respected. And that's why for Hindus, we say, truth is one, but people call it by many names, right? So they call it Allah. I can't say, well, that's wrong, right? Sure. I have to say, oh, that's another way. Teach me that way.
Yeah.
They call it, and the thing is, like, even in practical terms, so, okay, religio, I looked up the meaning of this a while back. And one of the roots in Latin is to reconnect. Legio is like ligaments, they connect bones together, right? So to reconnect. Now, the word yoga means to connect. It means yoking, like you yoke oxen to an ox cart, right? They have a yoke. So
someone told me once in yoga that it was letting go. Is that related as well? Or was I just wrong? Okay.
There is, but the actual word yoga literally means to connect your individual Atma to Brahman. And to connect myself to yourself through Namaste, right? Through that attitude. And to connect yourself to everything around you. And so religion is a way of reconnecting. So, I mean, what all can we reconnect? We could reconnect with each other so that, there may be a Taliban that says we're the true Muslims, and all other Muslims who say that they want to coexist with non-Muslims are bad Muslims. I was just having a talk with a Muslim friend of mine a couple of days ago. And he said, those people are not Muslims, sir. They may call themselves Muslims. They may talk like this. They may grow their beards and try to quote the Quran, but Islam is peace.
Right.
We're not meant to judge each other. We're meant to live together in harmony.
Right.
Right. And so, religion can be that path of helping us to, find dharma. But when it's not, that's when we get into, your next, I think, question is about morality. And maybe I'll just flip right into that, because morality, just like religion.
If I could ask something before we flip,
sure.
actually, 'cause there's so much good stuff you unpacked there. I mean, religion is one of these, maybe the fundamental social technology, right? This compendium, I think was the term you used, of what? Mantras, motivational strategies, heuristics, rules of thumb for survival,
Yes.
natural laws, like the way nature works.
Yes.
That's pretty incredible. And it sounds, you're, describing it a lot like memory, right? There's a cultural memory function to this social technology we're describing as religion. And I couldn't help but connect that, because a lot of times people describe money as, oh, it's a group hallucination or a shared belief system. It starts to sound a lot like a religion. But the way you were describing money earlier, that it is a means of recording and rewarding value creation. And so there is this religious dimension to money. I mean, maybe it's just the fact that they're both social institutions in a way, right? You needed maybe religion to precede money. And we have religious
Mm.
connotations on money, right? Like it's on the US dollar. In God
Yes,
we trust, for instance.
exactly. Yeah. Uh, because it's at the core of it is respecting the human being as a full human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
That value creation, respecting someone else as a creator of value, just like respecting yourself as a value creator,
Yeah.
you know, and religion is not meant to subjugate people. It's meant to connect them to their higher power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Within them, to bring out the fullness of who you are,
Mm-hmm.
to reconnect you to that ultimate truth, right? Of which you are one spark.
Yeah.
And if money is a way of, in our material lives, reminding us, hey, you did something really good for somebody
Right.
once, right? And that's why you've got this much Bitcoin in your wallet,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that time, remember you helped them.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
maybe remembering that will make you think, you know what? I maybe I should do that again for somebody else.
Yeah. It's
Maybe I should start not being, a money taker, or a value taker and purely a consumer
a
or
value
or
maker.
thief.
Yeah.
Yeah, a value
Yeah.
maker.
I'm
Maybe that's
reminded
who I
of
really am.
um sort of like piggybacking off Ayn Rand. She said something like money is the material shape of the principle that men of goodwill must trade value for value. I might be combining a couple of her phrases here, but
Mm.
there's this idea that it is a manifestation of a higher principle, right? The principle of interdependence, perhaps. When you describe that we are all just one spark of that flame, it's like, yeah, we are
Yeah.
all interdependent through that flame.
Yes.
Without the flame,
Yeah.
there are no sparks, you know? So,
Yes.
and even people as distinctly irreligious as Nietzsche, he talked about
Mm.
the debtor creditor relationship. His hypothesis was that the debtor creditor relationship was the genesis of human memory, actually. That once
Mm.
you start having someone you've created debts, right? I've loaned you something. Well,
Ah.
now all of a sudden we need
Mm.
memory to track that. And eventually
Ah.
the memory gets too difficult. The cognitive load of that memory gets too large to maintain. So that is the genesis of
Mm.
money as a technology, that you get a token instead of
Ah.
a ledger entry. And so it's very
Yeah.
fascinating. Is again, we're talking like for me, we're coming back to that theme of bootstrapping human cognition, right? Like it's not like religion and rationality are two separate domains. It's like no, religion was the beginning of human rationality, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe is the most foundational substrate to it, and we get other
I really think,
layers like money on
yeah,
top of that.
I really do think that, the Vedas, see, the Vedas for a long time, especially during the colonial period, were misunderstood because they were just, there was an agenda for misunderstanding them,
Hmm.
and for diminishing what Indian culture was, because the British to needed to propagandize the superiority of British
Hmm.
civilization, Western
Hmm.
civilization. So Indians are now really just starting to rediscover the value of them. But
Hmm.
one thing I think is, why even bother? Why would somebody pray? Why would somebody meditate? And, if you're living an otherwise comfortable life, but you've just got, I get occasional neck pain and, so my blood pressure's a little high, so I'll try that meditation.
Hmm.
That's not an absolute survival necessity,
Hmm.
right? But I think meditation, the reciting of mantras, and the reason why, see, these Vedas have been passed on through an oral transmission from
Hmm.
guru to sishya, from guru to student, generation after generation now, for thousands of years. And only recently were they written down. And
Hmm.
the written down things are not considered to be useful because the Vedas have to be recited. And they have to be recited precisely with the exact intonation and rhythm in every single verse
Hmm.
in order to have the proper effect on the mind, and to create the right vibrations for the group that's performing whatever sacrifice or
Hmm.
ritual that they're doing. Or if it's an individual mantra that you're reciting for meditation, it also has to be done precisely. So it has to be taught human to human. Okay. Why would people who obviously have better things to do keep doing that if it's just a hobby? Why would they do it if it's just, I mean, after a while, you're like, oh, well, we want to hold on to our cultural traditions. He wants to hold, no.
Yeah, right.
You only do things when you absolutely have to do them. And Hindus, Indians have been doing this thing generation after generation, 10,000 years. So there's something valuable in them. And I think right now we're in a phase where I think a lot of Hindus are just, they don't even know fully. They're kind of like, it's the Lindy effect almost,
Yeah,
where,
right.
something's been
Yeah,
useful for this long, it's probably going to
yeah,
continue to be in
yeah.
use. And I think a lot of us sort of feel like, the Vedas, they were with Indian civilization for all this time. We can't give up on them now. And that was the thing during the British days. Now India is being independent. People are actually finding that, you know what? This way is a better way of running a company, according to these Vedic principles. Or this is a better principle for creating, a policy for, a certain kind of law enforcement.
Right.
Or, we should approach education the way they did 600 years ago, according to these principles, instead of using the method that they used in Victorian England,
Yes. Yeah.
And so, but, that rediscovery wouldn't have been possible if people during those dark years hadn't just held on to it, saying, no, 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 I know we survived because of this, and we're going to survive again because of it. I don't think people see, to take a Christian example, loving your enemies is, I'm going to put it, super hard, right?
Right. Probably the hardest thing.
It can make for a lot of stress, sadness, difficulty, sacrifice, pain, danger, right? You literally endanger yourself out of love of Jesus and faith that what he said was a good idea to live by. I mean, how profound is that? It's 2,000 years ago, in a different time, in a different culture, and he said this. And there are some very saintly Christians all over the world who are saying, yeah, that guy is a complete asshole, and I'm going to love him until I'm going to love him as much as I need to. Right? Or this guy's, threatening to kill me, and I'm going to show him that I'm not afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. Leading by example. And
it's profound that somebody would do that. They're not doing it for virtue signaling. They're not doing it just. And I don't think they're doing it because they're thinking, okay, this really sucks, but I'll get into heaven because of it. I think there's a reward in the here and now for living that kind of courageous life. And I think so. Back to what is religion? I think it goes back to, you remember when I said love is that force in a story that makes heroes of everybody involved?
It's the heroes and the villains unite, I think you said, right? Or
I think, yeah. So maybe religion at its best is a social technology for bringing out our heroism.
That's beautiful.
Right? I mean, Jesus.
The hero is who redeems others, right?
Yeah. Right. I mean, Jesus said the kingdom is within, right? His message was never worship me and I'm so great. It's quite literally,
okay, that's
follow
funny.
it in my footsteps.
It's funny you said that particular passage because you also brought up the Gospel of Thomas earlier, which is, these are called the Gnostic Gospels, right? They were Gospels that were removed from the Bible by the individual you named at some point.
Yeah.
So there were books that were in the Bible, and then they were excluded from the Bible. I believe this comes from the Gospel of Thomas. I'm reciting this secondhand through Joseph Campbell. He said, the kingdom, and I guess these would be the words of Christ from the Gospel of Thomas, the kingdom of heaven is spread upon the earth, but men do not see it. But
Oh,
you also just cited the words that the kingdom is within.
yeah.
And so I wanted to ask actually about that. Like, what does that mean? What is the
I think
kingdom?
it
The
comes,
king is it this realm of
yeah.
ideals or principles, like the world that could be? Is this what Christ, I mean, this is the hero that redeems. Christ is setting, he's the meta hero, he's the meta exemplar of what humanity can be if we act in a Christic way that then ushers in the kingdom, both within and without of us.
So, uh, I don't want to offend anybody, and I'm not qualified to give a strictly
You're in the
Christian
right place to
perspective on
offend,
this, but
hopefully.
but from my background as somebody who's a Hindu but who's grown up with a lot of Christian context as
Mhm,
well, and reading it, so Hindus often have spiritual guides, gurus of some kind.
mhm,
Most families will have some guru who serves as a spiritual guide, either somebody they actually can go and learn from, or somebody whose teachings they read, who may have died in the last century or several
mhm,
centuries ago, but they follow that tradition. And there's always this tension of people who just want to worship the guru, but then say, well, I can never be like that, but I will, fall at his feet and
mhm,
worship him.
mhm, mhm,
And then there'll be somebody else who says, nope, get up. Our guru did not say, worship me, and then, excuse yourself from trying to do the same things I've done. Our
mhm,
guru said, here's the lesson, you learn it, and you become a guru yourself,
mhm,
right? And so uh, this is this happens quite a lot in a lot of different sects. And this is the challenge. Even with Gandhi, for example, you have a lot of people in India and elsewhere who say,
mhm,
but Gandhi he was a Mahatma. He was a great
mhm,
soul. He wasn't an ordinary human being. I can't be a Mahatma Gandhi,
mhm.
you know. And I think Gandhiji would have been really pissed off by somebody saying I can't. But his whole message was not only can you be a Mahatma Gandhi, but it's your duty to try to be a Mahatma
Mm,
Gandhi or better, right? Gandhiji was not the end of it. See, there were two technologies that were unleashed in the 20th century. One was the atomic energy,
mhm,
and the other was nonviolent revolutions.
mm,
And we know it worked because without any standing revolutionary army, India overthrew the British Empire,
mm.
which just 30
Wow.
years before had been the most powerful empire in human history.
Mm,
And yes, people can say yes, but they were drained by the expense of World War II, and
mm,
there were a lot of opposition. The Labor Party was this and that.
mhm,
And no, and it's not that India had been completely drained dry. There was still,
mm.
they had stolen about $45 trillion worth of India's wealth by that point, apparently,
Sure.
by some calculations.
Yeah.
But there was still more to bleed, you know. And so, but nonviolent resistance worked. But the whole point of Gandhi's message was, okay, just like, Enrico Fermi split the atom and we managed to make an atomic bomb, and there's a lot more to do with this technology to
Mhm.
use it safely. I've done a crude initial step in the refining of nonviolent revolution technology. Now you
Wow.
take it and run with it. And there are people doing it. In the former Yugoslavia, Srđan
Yeah.
Popovic and crew, the way they overthrew Milosevic,
Mm,
it's just, I mean, they used comedy. He's got a great
mm,
book called Blueprint for a Revolution. And
mhm,
that's why I give this lecture sometimes at there's an Academy of Economics for economics grad students. And the lecture is called Bitcoin as a Form of Satyagraha.
mm,
And basically, I take Satoshi's invention of Bitcoin and Gandhiji's 1930s Salt March, it's called. It's,
mhm,
it's where he left his ashram, marched about 250 miles, and then broke the law. He broke the
uh-huh.
law by taking salt that he himself boiled seawater and made salt
Right.
and consumed it without paying a tax on that salt.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was illegal. Right? And if you go down the line at each step of the way, they're exactly the same. It's, first identify what's unjust. Then the next is make the injustice visible. Then show people a way that they can get involved. And then finally make people convinced that they can make a difference. And Satoshi did this. You know, I mean, he didn't have to really make the injustice invisible. In 2008, it just became globally visible to everybody. Bear Stearns falls, Wall Street falls, a whole lot of things just collapse. But then Satoshi puts that thing in the Genesis block, right? Of the central bank. I mean, I find it to be an angry revolutionary act. And then what does he do? He puts out this open source piece of software that anybody can download. I mean, what a miraculous, marvelous piece of mischief that was, right? It's like, I'm just going to leave this here. Y'all do what you want to do.
Yeah. When you named those technologies, the two most transformational technologies of the 20th century, you said atomic energy and nonviolent revolutions.
Yeah.
I did not see the second one coming. I thought you were going to say the microprocessor.
It's there too.
Well, what I was getting at is Bitcoin is interesting though, because I think if Bitcoin succeeds, it's going to bring out the best in all of those technologies, right?
Yeah.
We'll move to a world that's more nuclear power centric because nuclear power is the most efficient, clean energy production technology in the world. Obviously, microprocessing will be pushed to its limits in Bitcoin mining. And then Bitcoin itself is a global nonviolent revolution. The usurpation of central banking, right? The end of the fiat currency scam. And as you said, that process of making the unjust known or visible, right? It's very interesting that the term, when I read the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island 20 years ago, the word fiat currency was unknown. Like if I said the word fiat currency, I was always met with blank stares. Like no one knew what that meant. Now, that term is popularized. I mean, I would say it's pretty much known by the majority, more or less. At least they've heard of it. They might not understand it. And so he's, you know, again, I would credit Satoshi with this, right? He's made the invisible fraud visible and at least made it part of popular vernacular. And in bringing it to consciousness, he's throwing light on the corruption and fraud that it is.
Yes.
And so, man, what a genius maneuver.
Yes. Yeah. It's just elegant.
Yes.
Really beautiful.
So much
Sorry,
good
I veered
stuff
away
there.
from
No. It's so good, so good. Okay, so, and I didn't mean to. You were ready to veer into morality earlier, and I kept you here because I had so many questions. But that was great stuff.
Did I answer those questions? Did we get to?
Well, you were going to go into morality next. I don't know if you've already woven that in, but I haven't posed the question yet, so I will pose it to you now. What is morality?
So, you know, it's like religion. It can be a couple of things because, like religion, morality can be used to judge. Morality can be used to condemn. Morality can be used to control people and take away their freedom, right? By shaming and coercion and you know, creating collective sort of psychosis that locks people into beliefs, right? So dharma is something else because, as we said, dharma is a fundamental truth. It's not something that somebody decided, okay, this is dharma, now everybody go do that because I, the lawgiver, have told you. It's a fundamental truth to be understood and followed. So whereas morality can be a rule for fitting into a given society, right? And that's why it's possible for something to be considered moral and go against dharma. And you know, this happens a lot. And so as societies evolve, as communities evolve, to use another Sanskrit term, you asked about rationality, and I gave you that term viveka, which means the ability to distinguish between what's real and unreal.
Right.
After maybe a very painful process of discovery, a society or community may come to see that something which they considered moral is actually unjust and actually against dharma. And then one way or another, either through a violent revolution or a non-violent revolution or gradual change, they may hopefully evolve to become more in line with Dharma. So, a society could go from seeing something immoral, like a woman having her own job and her own bank account and going to that job in a short skirt, right? And you go to some places in the world and somebody will say that's completely immoral. Women should not be doing that. And in other places in the world, they'll say, no, actually, that's completely in line with Dharma and actualization of her ability to be who she truly is and display her God-given abilities and powers, right? And so morality, I guess, true morality would be anything, any system, any set of rules that helps us to be in line with Dharma and particularly with nonviolence. But, a lot of times we end up calling something immoral, and in doing so, we end up hurting other people unjustly, and dehumanizing them.
Yeah.
So again, morality should be loving, right? Ideally, to be truly moral.
And adaptive, it sounds like. There's a delicate balance to strike here because you need to preserve the lessons of history, I guess, for what is moral and, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. These things seem to be somewhat timeless, but short skirts, maybe that's more, we can have a little flexibility there. The skirts can get shorter over time, something like that.
Well, see that, and adaptability is a good word for this because it's because we evolve, and sometimes we evolve backwards and we evolve forwards, and so morality needs to adjust. I'll give you an example. So in India, at the end of the 19th century, was in a lot of Indian women were married off as children. There was child marriage was pretty common. And some of those girls who were married as children, let's say at age 10, the husband might die of cholera or some other disease. So at age 14, 13, 14, she might be a widow. Okay. And in many cases, those widows of whatever age, including children, they were made to shave their heads, to only wear white, and to basically stay inside the house, not go out. And they lived that life as kind of servants in the household of their in-laws. It was a miserable existence, right? They weren't allowed to pursue their further education. Now, that sounds horrible to any of us in modern life. And in fact, it was one of my ancestors was a major campaigner for the rights of such child widows and led for a lot of social reforms in the early 20th century. And a lot of changes have been made. So you don't see it now. Okay. But why would an otherwise basically decent society even have such a practice? If you go back several centuries earlier, there was a time in Indian life when there was a series of invasions: Mongols, Turks, Huns, Afghans, and kingdoms fighting within them. So if you lived in a village, there was a good chance that at some point, some raiding band of invaders, of bandits, of somebody or other would come in, and your women would be in danger. And so when you have that, what do you do in desperation? Make sure that every girl has at least one more protector other than her father and her brothers. So bind her in marriage to another family that also has men who may be armed and can protect her. So now she has two families of men to protect her. And then if she's widowed and no longer has that husband, how do you protect her? Keep her as unattractive as possible so that a gang of rapists coming through the village doesn't pick her up and abduct her and do the worst to her.
Crazy.
It's a horrible life to think about, but it's the reality for a lot of people. It's a reality even now. I mean, recently in Congo, during the war in Congo, rape gangs were actively created by the both sides of the armies, and they would go through. I mean, the sexual abuse of women in war is actually a very serious issue now in 2024. So imagine what it was in those days.
Sure.
And if you are that desperate as a village or as a community, then you're going to say, okay, women, we used to be in a society where women dressed as they wanted to and had equal jobs and went out and did their own businesses and did anything they wanted to. And they were religious leaders and, political leaders and everything else. But now we don't even have the means to protect ourselves. So we need you to cover your heads, cover your faces, hide when strange men are around. Don't go out by yourself. Always have your brother accompanying you, right?
It's desperate times
And
call for desperate measures type of
measures,
thing.
but then those desperate measures continue to be used long after the desperation is gone.
Right.
I mean, even in Saudi Arabia now, a
Mhm.
lot of women can't go out without a male accompanying them.
Yeah.
At the same time, when Saudi Arabia is trying to promote themselves as this very modern tourist destination, and they've still got this legacy.
Yeah,
So there they have to, they have to have their own discerning of real and not real, and is this moral rule in line with
appropriateness,
justice,
context, circumstance.
Yeah.
It seems like a problem we'll likely always deal with to some extent is that these protective measures in one era can become incarcerating in another era, right? That
it is. That's why we can't, to be honest, as much as I agree with you about the Fed, and I'm a Bitcoiner too, but we can't demonize those who created the Fed. We can't even completely demonize Richard Nixon for taking us off the gold standard. I mean, his reasons were pretty sketchy, but if you look back and think about Bretton Woods to begin with, it was gonna come. It was bound to happen. You just can't have the U.S. amassing that much gold,
or any
having
group of humans for that matter, right? They just can't. That's what I do, and I hope it comes across in the show, but I try to transcend the political, right? I'm not here to say, here's the bad guys, here's the good guys. It's more like, look, we're human. There are certain things that we need to know about ourselves, and when I say ourselves, it means sure, there might be people that have a better moral compass and a worse moral compass, but in general, when you put that much power in one place, it's going to eventually draw the most unscrupulous of people towards it. It's like flies to the lantern kind of thing. It's not useful. I don't think it's useful to be like, oh, it's Nixon's fault. Oh, it's Jerome Powell's fault. That's not useful because you're looking at the individual driver rather than the vehicle they are driving. And it's the vehicle, the incentive structure itself that's where you can make systemic change is by tuning the vehicle rather than the swapping out the driver.
Yeah. And this is not moral relativism. It's not saying, well, everybody's right in their own context.
No.
And so because sometimes I think some Western scholars and others, they look at Hindus and say, oh, well, what is with you people? Every god is okay. If I make up a new god, can I worship that also? And that's first of all oversimplifying. And it's not that we're saying all moralities are equal.
Sure.
It's saying that human beings are not perfect.
Right.
So we are trying to be in line with Dharma. We're trying to live dharmic lives. But I'm going to make a mistake on my side. You're going to make a mistake on your side.
Right.
And the fact is, we are interdependent, right? So I said, I look out and I see this great crime happening all around us, right? But it's wrong of me to say that I'm not complicit in that crime. I, along with every one of us, we're all co-conspirators in, this old capitalism that needs to be, transformed into a new capitalism. It's a crime in which we're all co-conspirators.
Yeah. And the central banking scam that we talk about a lot on this show, like I talk about it, but I hold dollars in accounts.
Yeah.
So if I hold purchasing power in dollars, then I'm a co-conspirator, as you said. And
I burned some fossil fuels just an hour ago, right? A couple hours ago. Yeah.
It's better. It is more accurate and useful, I think, to look at it from that level of analysis
Yeah.
rather than trying to do the good guy, bad guy, us versus them thing, because that degenerates into the irrationality of violence.
Hmm.
Because
It
as you
is.
said earlier, if you dehumanize the other, well, all of a sudden, wow, kill them,
Exactly.
whatever, off of their heads. But
Yeah, because you're not killing a human being,
that's
right?
right, exactly.
You're killing it. And this is why it's dangerous when, and you see this over and over, strongmen referring to some imagined enemy as vermin,
Yes, of
as
course, of
those
course.
code words that Joseph
Yeah,
Goebbels used
right.
brilliantly in his making
I think
during the Nazi era.
anti-vaxxers was pretty well used over the past few years. I mean,
You know,
um,
it descended into this argument that helped no one. So it was unfortunate.
maybe this was from
It's
his
just
book, actually. The purpose of propaganda is to make one group of humans forget that another group of humans is human.
yeah, yeah. I'm not sure if it's Edward Bernays or I mean Goebbels, but he
Yeah.
certainly did it, right? So many Germans afterwards, like the reconciliation in Rwanda, they openly addressed this from what I've read.
Hmm.
That you failed to see the humanity of the other side, and so did you. We all did,
Mm.
and so we were committing the same crime, but in
Yes.
opposite directions.
Right. Right. And this is, yeah, morality, right? It is I don't know, the only, not the only, a very important protective layer against our animality. Let's say, if you pluck out morality or religion, well, humans become barbaric, basically, and it's dog eat
They
dog.
do, but they could, but on the other side, though, you have to wonder, is our essential nature to harm one another and exploit one another? I'm not so sure it is. I think
No, no, I don't. Yeah.
I
Well, this
think
is where we draw the
religion,
line. It's like, well, is morality is almost part of our nature in a way, because we are the
I think
rational
it is.
animal, as Aristotle said.
And I think it can, I think morality, like mantra, like prayer, came about as a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
You were just more likely to survive as a group of 15 humans trying to wander around in a planet that only had a few 100,000 humans.
Yeah.
If you took good care of each other,
Right.
you learned to resolve your conflicts, you you stayed back to help the weakest one, make it over the hill and to the next cave,
Yeah.
you know, all those things. And so, but sometimes, people they'll react to fear more quickly than they react to hope.
Hmm.
And so when you know that, okay, this kind of morality is good for a society, then you know what? Let's make them afraid to not do it
Mm.
in some way. Let's create a
Hmm. Hmm.
rule that
Right.
says they'll be shunned if they don't do it. They'll go
Yeah.
to hell if they don't do it. They'll be bad
Yeah.
Muslims, Christians, Hindus, whatever, if they don't do it,
Yeah.
But I think I see that as a kind of stopgap measure, right?
Yeah.
You don't get you don't make great people out of just making them fear doing wrong.
Agreed.
You get great people out of making them just thrilled and excited about all the good they can do for each other
Yes.
and for themselves,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's well said. It's carrots and sticks aren't enough, right? Like the incentives, as
Um,
much as we talk about
there's
how
something
important
else.
they are, there's also a deeper
There is.
thing. I don't know, divinity, perhaps, which is a great
Mhm.
segue to the last question I have for you today.
Uh, yeah.
What is God?
Mm. So, this is one of those, you could do not just an entire series on it. You could have a channel just on this. The same way you've got what is money and you haven't answered it in this many questions.
Oh yeah. It's almost like world history is this, right? What is
So
God?
I think, from the perspective of the Vedas acknowledge, I think, the unanswerability of this, because there's this concept of Brahman. Brahman it's not a definition, it's just an acknowledgement that there is an absolute reality, and we can't know it fully because we ourselves are inside of it and we're part of it. I mean, it's hard for our brains to even conceive of the entire universe. Right now, there are several billion galaxies all spinning nicely, and you and I haven't even given one thought to whether they're doing okay.
Right.
They're just spinning. Okay?
Yeah.
And yet there is some larger being that's keeping track of all of them, right? Oh, this one's spinning just right. This one needs a little tweak in this direction. Oh, I forgot about this supernova over here, right? Times a billion.
Yeah.
Right? And whatever that is, that force that creates, that sustains, that destroys in order that whatever is destroyed can be transmuted and then lead to new creation, right? This is all impossible for us to conceive of. So in most Hindu traditions, there is that abstract concept of God, Brahman, which is too abstract and difficult. And then there's a more personal conception of God. And there are several terms for that have their roots. Bhagwan is one, Ishvara. These are terms, I won't go into the etymology of each one. But the reason to have a personal conception of God is, first of all, because, it makes us happy to recognize the divinity inside ourselves and our connection to that larger truth. And so having a conception of God allows me to focus on those higher qualities in myself. Okay. So accept this idea first, see if this works for you. Whether we acknowledge it or not, what I see and feel when I say the word God and what you see and feel when you say the word God are not exactly the same. Okay? Even though we're using the exact same word.
Right.
Okay? Even if you and I are both Christians of the same tradition, or we're both Shia Muslims who follow the same Imam, and we both say God, or we both say Allah, it won't be exactly the same. So in that sense, in that literal sense, at that moment, we're seeing different gods.
Yes.
Right? Though we're using the same term. And so that's one reason why, in the Vedas, it says the truth is one, but people call it by different names. Right. And even in practical terms, like, okay, Christians call Jesus the Prince of Peace, right? It's called the Lamb of God. I think in Matthew, he's even called Emmanuel, right? Which means the one who calls God to us, right? Now, only an ignorant person would say, hey, that's 4 different gods there. What about that lamb god? You worshiping some sort of animal? Is that? I thought that wasn't allowed. Right? Imagine some blowhard missionary coming and saying, you Christians with your multiple gods, I don't get you. Right? You try to explain, no, Prince of Peace, Lamb of God, those are all the same.
Right.
It's all Jesus. But there were a lot of missionaries who came to India and said, you people with all your multiple gods, you don't understand there's only one true faith, and that's Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. They said, yeah, we know Jesus also for a long time, but let us explain to you that these concepts of these different deities are ways in which we are able to focus our meditation, focus our thinking, focus what we need to activate inside ourselves in order to become fully human, right? And so God in that sense is unknowable, but in our process of trying to achieve happiness in life and purpose, we're trying to discover the divinity inside ourselves, but we use different concepts of God. I think a woman who is in the middle of childbirth and praying to Jesus and a man who is on a battlefield praying for victory to Jesus, they're seeing different aspects of Jesus at that moment.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you need a different Jesus for each one. Okay. And never mind the crazy people in every religion, right? The Ku Klux Klan thinks that they are very good Christians, right?
Right.
For them, Jesus is a white guy who loves guns. And, you know, I disagree with that.
Right.
But, you know, before I get too judgy, because that's an easy cheap shot to take, I have to understand, okay, why do they need that? You know, why does somebody need to believe that? You know, what threat do they feel to their sense of their heritage as a European American or as a white person? You know, what are they going through that makes them have that need for that particular conception? You know, and so for better or worse reasons, sometimes we have different gods, but we're all just trying to get at one truth. It's like different paths up the same mountain, so to speak. So there is defining God would be impossible because the ultimate truth is beyond definitions. But at the same time, we're part of that, whatever it is. And so to know ourselves and feel that we're being fully ourselves, whatever we were born to be in this life, and whatever we might want to be in whatever next life there is, we need a way to pursue that self-knowledge. And so, for Hindus, you'll go to temples and you'll see multiple different gods in different shapes with different names and different qualities, different stories of how they came to be and what they did and what their mythology is, right? But for example, a lot of people have seen Ganesh, who's a god with an elephant's head, right? And that I can understand to anybody who hasn't come from this cultural context, that just seems bizarre, right? The chubby man with an elephant head, what's that about? How can you worship that? Why would you worship that? Why not at least worship something that looks more like you, right? At least to avoid that confusion. But in fact, there are a number of stories of Ganesh, but I'll give you just a couple of things in particular. Ganesh is an elephant who has large ears, but a very small mouth that's hidden. And so that allows you to meditate on the idea that you should be more involved in listening and trying to understand than in expressing what your ego already has to express.
In the South, you used to always hear, God gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason.
Yeah, yeah. And it's the same thing, right? It's a universal truth.
Yeah.
But that's just a simple one. And that's what anybody who's showing their child Ganesh and saying, this is what Ganesh is, and do you see Ganesh has big ears? This is why you should listen. When you started from the age of 3 or 4, you'll start learning this. But then there are more profound things, including the fact that actually that shape of an elephant head, if you draw the outline of it, it actually, with the trunk curving like this, it's actually the shape of the symbol Om. If you've ever heard.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Om is to say Om is to express all the different aspects of vocal expression. You start with ah in the back of your throat and come all the way to and the closing of the mouth. So it's all the sounds that a human being can express in one.
All the vowels
And
in
it's
one sound, right?
yes.
Yes.
And it's a way of actually physically reflecting inside the vibrations of your body the primordial vibration of the universe. And reciting Om, I mean, at least 10,000 years of experience shows that it does have profound effects on your health, your mental well-being, etc. And so Ganesha is also called Omkara, which means the form of Om. And so once you reach a certain level of education and spiritual understanding, you don't see the elephant head anymore. You see the Om. And so you meditate on Om. And there are other, aspects to it. An elephant's trunk is powerful enough to uproot a tree, but dexterous or nimble enough that you could pick up a single, a nail off the ground.
Right.
And it shows that we should also be, in our abilities, powerful and yet delicate at the same time. And so you can take each aspect of that image, or each aspect of any sculpture or image of any of the deities, and spend literally months contemplating how that reflects a quality inside of you that you want to develop.
Wow.
And so, and in the Vedas, it says the devas are, there's in fact a famous passage from one of the Upanishads, which is a set of like commentaries or extensions of the Veda. It says, it may not be that the gods created men as you think. It may in fact be that the men created the gods. Right. So Hinduism is a kind of, if it's a religion, it's a religion. It's a religion that actually subverts itself.
Wow.
It says it's perfectly fine to be an atheist. It's perfectly fine to say, I'm creating this God in my mind so that I can activate the full potential of my mind.
Right.
Okay? And if a Christian or Muslim chooses to do that by the worship of Jesus or Mary or Allah, they're doing the same thing by a different path, which I should respect.
Thanks to my friends at Swan Bitcoin for supporting the show. Swan sponsored the Sailor series, and I appreciate their support from the very beginning of the What is Money show, and I'm happy to welcome them back. Swan has grown a lot since then. They've built a full-service, Bitcoin-centric financial services company with several different offerings. With the Swan app, you can set up instant and recurring Bitcoin buys, and with this, you can get started at swan.com/breedlove. Swan also enables clients in the US to hold Bitcoin directly in an IRA account, so you can hold Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged way. Get started at swan.com/IRA. If you're looking to buy more than $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, check out Swan Private. You'll get concierge support for buy execution, retirement accounts, inheritance and estate planning, and access to exclusive events, research, and other content. Get started at swan.com/private. Swan Institutional provides financial services to institutions, including Bitcoin-backed lending, asset management, principal investments, Bitcoin services for financial advisors, and Bitcoin mining operations. For those new to Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Swan's Welcome to Bitcoin course at swan.com/welcome. So go to swan.com/breedlove today to get started on your Bitcoin buying journey. Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code BREEDLOVE to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code BREEDLOVE. What's striking about what you just said is that is also what the purpose of rationality really is, to subvert its own creations, right? Like we create one model, Newtonian physics, that works really good for a while, but the purpose of rationality is so that we can get to Einsteinian physics, and then we can get to quantum physics.
Not real, right?
So it's there's a
Newtonian mechanics was
technological
real up till this point, and then we get into a certain realm where it's no longer fitting.
Yes.
Right. It was an approximation.
It's mind-blowing.
Which is why we need personal guidance, right? It is mind-blowing.
Yes.
But when when you're sick in bed and you're worried that you've got something serious and you want to pray, you can't pray to some abstract, universal concept of,
Right.
being and nothingness.
Yes.
What you need is you need a mother goddess who's
That's
gonna
right.
just say, it's okay. It's okay, kid.
Yes.
You're gonna get through this. The
Yes.
fever is gonna come down. Even if it's a bad disease, you'll get through it. We love you. Everybody loves you. You're lovable, right?
And it
You
may,
need a father figure. You need a brother. You need whatever it is you particularly need.
yes. And when we reflect upon the idea that what we believe can actually change our biological processes, that even though maybe it's a fiction, maybe man created the gods, as you just said, but
Ah,
doesn't mean it's not useful because it's fictional, right? Numbers are fictional, right? Whereas
actually,
whereas
yeah,
whereas three, like
yeah, it's true.
these things there. Peterson talks about this a lot. It's not like truth or reality versus fiction. It's almost like these fictions can be a form of hyper reality, and that they can, you can contain more information about reality in these fictions than you can see in reality itself, which again gets
Yeah.
back to someone like the story of Christ being a meta hero. Like it doesn't matter actually that the historicity or the theology. It's like, even if it's just a story, it can be a
Yes.
very useful application for the human moral software, right? And like how to act, how to be in
And
the world.
yeah, I remember watching a documentary, one of those, the search for the historical Jesus kind of
Hmm.
documentaries and it occurred to me, you know what? If it turns out he never existed, I don't mind.
Yeah.
I don't mind
Yeah.
because the
Exactly.
story will still give me comfort in times of
Yes.
torment, right? And
Yeah.
uncertainty. It'll help me,
Yeah.
and so
And,
fictional or not, an exaggeration of some little story or whatever it is. And
yeah.
even if that's the case, imagine the amount of goodwill it took
Yeah.
by a group of Christians who may have had some kind of teacher, a rabbi, who did a few things.
Yeah.
And then over 200 years, they sort of kept retelling the story and adding a
Yes.
little bit here and,
Yeah.
fudging a little bit there. And by the
Yeah.
time it gets to Paul and Peter, and then it gets to, the Council of Jerusalem, and then the next, you know, they've created a story that's actually, helping people get through the oppression of the Roman Empire and
Yeah.
persecution and all
Yeah.
these other things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
There's
even if it
something,
was, yeah, even if it came out that the historicity was completely bogus, he never lived, none of that. Like, I still don't think the story is going away. Like, the story is here.
no,
It's already reformed our legal systems. It's reformed our moral intuitions. It's changed the course of history. You can't just
yes,
be like, oh, never mind. He was, never mind. Unpluck that. It's like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
ingrained in us. It's ingrained in the course of history already. It's like there's no going back, right? It's path
right,
dependent.
right,
Um, and that, yeah, very fascinating journey.
yeah.
I've kept you way longer than I'm supposed to keep you, but this idea of
You've got an
God,
editing.
no, we posted as it is. So, um, this perspective of God, like almost always being inexorably something that's higher dimensional, right? So it's like, if we're from the perspective of a blank 2D page, how does one describe a three-dimensional sphere? Right?
Mm,
Like, if you're from the perspective of a two-dimensional page, a sphere looks like a circle. How can you
yeah,
possibly describe those other dimensions of the sphere, right? You're missing 99.9% of the sphere. You're just describing one
right.
aspect, as you're saying, like maybe that's one of these
Yes,
gods that is not the god, but is part of the god.
yes.
But
And
we,
sometimes people use pantheons like that. I mean, the Greeks and Romans certainly
yes,
did.
yes, exactly. And so I
And
don't,
and and the roots of those gods and the Vedic gods are actually because Indo-European culture was very much, kind of connected. So, for example, one of the Vedic gods is called Dyaus, and he's a sky god.
mhm,
He's only mentioned a few times in the Vedas, not worshipped today.
mhm,
And in some places, he's called the sky father. So Dios, and the Sanskrit word for father is Pitra. Dios
mhm,
Pitra. So remember that. Now, Dios in Greek is pronounced Zeus.
Mm.
And Dios and Pitra together are Jupiter. It was the same sky god. Yes. It's the same sky god from a much more ancient common heritage.
Yes.
And the ancient Slavic and Ukrainian gods also have connections to this same mythology and set of cultures. So it was one kind of family of cultures with a lot of commonalities, from all the way west as Greece, all the way east as Southeast Asia and China.
So I see this all like, so you're basically saying that there can be no consensus on the word God, right? It's almost like the point of the word God is like, if words are these little units of social consensus, right? The English language works to the extent that when I say a word, it invokes roughly the same meaning in your mind as I had when I spoke it, right? That's how we're connecting our minds. But there's always something beyond words, right? The true ultimate reality is always beyond words. God is like the placeholder for that. It's like whatever we haven't mapped in our current level of knowledge or technology, there's always that that between the lines, right? And that is God. So it's like the word for that which is beyond words, it speaks to me like zero being the number for that which is not a number, right? Or beyond number, something like that. It's you cannot define God. Well, if you divide by zero, it's not defined, right? Looking at things in terms of zero is undefinable. Looking at things in terms of God is like it's undefinable. It's like there's an unknowability to reality that we have to contend with in our symbolic structures. Therefore, we have something like God. We have something like zero. And I'm not trying to limit God to that and say, oh, God is the zero, but I'm saying it's one aspect of
it is
a practical utility of the idea of God, at least.
It is. If we stay with the idea, the word or any such word, right? We're using words for several things. In this case, we're using words to kind of transmit an idea back and forth to each other, right? And so, and I can say God to you, knowing that it's an unknowable, but just sort of handing that to you, and we're able to share that. But so the Vedas, as I said before, they were transmitted very precisely and carefully, including the actual pitch and rhythm of every single syllable and half syllable, right? And that's because in Vedic grammar, the effect on the mind of those rhythms and pitches was a precise science. So there was a grammar written by a man named Panini, who he defined the rules for Sanskrit grammar. And Sanskrit and Tamil are the only languages that have a complete grammar, meaning that there are no exceptions to rules, right? Like in English, we have I before E except after C, right? There's exceptions to any rule. Because English is it's a spoken language that evolved over time and adjusted itself to the circumstances. There's no one English. There are Englishes of all kinds. There's Jamaican English, Indian English, American English. But Sanskrit, it had some changes in usage, but it still conforms to a certain grammar. And the reason for that grammar is so that the mental and spiritual effectiveness of the recitation should not be lost. And so there isn't a single word like God in the Veda or in Sanskrit, because instead the various qualities of the divine are recited. So Shiva is the name of a god, but actually Shivam means auspiciousness of any kind. Auspiciousness would probably be the most common way it's translated. So that which is auspicious, meaning that which comes into being at the time when you need it to be there and is helpful. Okay, it's very tough to translate, but Shivam, and the way, how do we know that that's what Shivam means? You look at all the different ways it was used in various prayers, and you can see. So Rama is the name of a Hindu god, a famous Hindu god, and the Ramayana is the epic, which is the story of Rama.
Mm-hmm.
And Rama is worshipped very commonly among all Hindus.
Mm-hmm.
But Rama actually is a word for joy. It's a specific kind of joyousness. And so these are something, there's an English word epithet. These are ways of calling. So if you were praising God, this unknowable thing, you would say, you who are auspicious, you who bring joy, you who are the giver of wealth, you who are the one who protects me from disease, you who are the one who gives me the ability to discern right from wrong, you who allow me to learn and be educated. Okay. You who create harmony between people. Okay. And now these are all actual epithets of God.
Right.
And so the hymns, so there's a famous and commonly recited prayer called Vishnu Sahasranamam. Vishnu is the name of one of the Hindu gods.
Mm-hmm.
Vishnu actually just means all pervading. It just means you who are everywhere.
Right.
Okay. But there's one particular god who gets to be named Vishnu. And Rama is actually an avatar of Vishnu, meaning Vishnu came to earth in the form of this king named Rama. But the Vishnu Sahasranamam, Sahasra means 1,000, Nama is name, Nam. Okay. So you recite the 1,000 names of God, the 1,000 names of Vishnu. And those 1,000 names will be all these different qualities, which are noble and good qualities, life-giving qualities, life-affirming qualities, qualities which sustain us and make our lives happy. So it's thank you 1,000 times for these 1,000 different specific ways in which you are divine in my life, right? So you can imagine that's a much more specific way of thanking God.
Yes.
Right? Than the average. And yet, so I guess you could say that Hindus don't say God, just the one word God.
Right.
Instead, they seek ways to thank God for different things. Like Ganesha means ganas are qualities or forces of nature. Isha means he who is a master of them. So Ganesha is one name for this god, and he's the one who allows us to master the different forces that might be trying to shove us around.
Is this where we get the word like genius and genie? I'm
I
not
don't
sure if there's
know,
a
Gana
relation to that.
and genius. I'll have to look that up.
I've
That
heard of
might
that.
be.
What you described, the master of
Yeah.
forces of nature being connected. I don't know if it's connected. I could be wrong, but
I'll have to look that up.
that was beautiful, by the way. Almost acknowledging that God is beyond definition. So instead, you choose to emphasize the practically useful or generative aspects of God in
Or the
human
way
life.
in which God, or the way in which God is entering your life at that particular moment.
Right.
Right? So another name for Ganesha is Vigneshwara. Vignam means an obstacle. So the Lord of obstacles. But another way to describe it is the remover of obstacles.
Yes,
So and in Silicon Valley, in a lot of companies, there's a statue of Ganesha nowadays, and it's not just because there's so many Indian engineers there, although that's probably one reason, one of the initial reasons. But a lot of them in that sort of Silicon Valley culture, they get the idea that, you know what, we're a startup, we're gonna face a lot of obstacles. It might be good to specifically pray for some divine help or some inner power to emerge from within us, that courage that we know is inside us, but is hard for us sometimes to come up with, to overcome these obstacles, to see these obstacles as opportunities and not, blockages, and find a way to take advantage of them and not be, dissuaded by them. Right.
Yes.
And so you're literally praying for the ability to remove obstacles in your own mind, because, is it really an obstacle, or is it just that you think it's an
That's
obstacle?
right. Yeah. Right.
It's usually you think it's an
Right.
obstacle, right?
Yeah.
So what you're praying for is the ability to remove that illusion.
Yes. There you go.
And so at that moment, God, however you want to define God,
Mhm.
is specifically the one who tells you you're just imagining that it's an obstacle, but don't
Right.
let it get you. Don't let it stop you, right? And now for a Christian, that might be Jesus coming and telling you,
Yeah.
you know, and you might be reminded of, even if you have faith as much as a mustard seed,
Yes.
you know, that'll be enough for you, right?
Yeah. No,
By
that's
the way, Indians cook with mustard seeds all the time. Like we put them in the oil to start anything.
uh,
So every time I cook, I throw a handful of mustard seeds and they start sputtering in the oil. I instantly think of that parable. So
beautiful.
but that's another reason why when you have all these stories and all these symbols, right?
Yeah. For the daily reminder effect.
Every time you cook with mustard seeds, you remember Jesus.
Yeah.
Now, how is that not a good thing in anybody's life,
Right.
right? And so if you can have 100 of those all throughout your day, you know,
Yes.
then you're constantly being lifted up. You're
Yes.
constantly being reminded there's more to you than just being a consumer and being an expense on somebody's spreadsheet and
Yeah.
being, whatever it is.
That's so well said. And there's this idea in Stoicism that the obstacle is the way. So that's coherent with what you just said. And
It
if
is.
God is just, without reducing God to that, but just whatever is not known then or is unknowable, that's also the source of all solutions, right? If you have a problem or an obstacle, well, the solution by definition is going to come from something you don't know, because if you knew it, it wouldn't be a problem. It wouldn't be an obstacle.
Yeah.
You would have already solved it.
Right.
So that
Yes,
obstacle comes from the unknown. So that is God entering your life in that sort of practical sense only.
it is. Yeah.
Um, Man, this has been honestly one of my favorite discussions on the show of all time. So, Vikram, I
Oh,
have to
thank
thank
you.
you. This has been
Thank you.
dynamite. And what a
I've had
great way to start this series. I'm going to ask this same sequence of questions to the other um,
Oh, I can't
religious
wait to see
figures
it.
from
Yeah.
Brian Esses's movie God Bless Bitcoin. So, woo, this was fun. Really enjoyed it.
Me too. And you know what? I can't wait to see. I haven't seen any of the others. I saw some of the teaser clips with Mark Cuban and I think Michael Saylor's in it, and
Yeah,
and I think most of the major Bitcoin, leaders and influencers are in it. So I was very humbled to be asked to be part of it. But
yeah,
now I'm really glad you're doing this series because I get to hear from some of the other people in there and learn from them. And
yeah.
I just can't wait to. I kind of envy you because you're gonna get to have all these. But
I'm
we'll,
excited for future
we'll,
me's too.
we'll- yeah, but we'll all get to follow it on the
Yeah.
YouTube channel.
Thanks to the magic of
And
technology, we can all share it.
yeah, yeah,
Um, okay. Yeah. I was just reminded of that phrase there at the end. What did Buddha say? Something about one candle can light 1,000 others while its flame burns undiminished. So just
yeah,
because I get to record the podcast with these guys doesn't stop anyone else from enjoying the journey too. Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
I'm wondering if this is going to be like the next phase for the public understanding of Bitcoin is as a social phenomenon,
Yeah.
as a way to unleash some of those things that have been sort of restricted,
Yeah.
because of the current systems,
Yeah.
and you know, years ago in 2011, I got a chance to give a TEDx talk, and it was awful. I had 102 fever, and I was reading from notes, and so
Mm,
I kind of still cringe when I watch it, but I actually made a couple of good points. They asked me, what do you really want to talk about? At the time, I was working on, if I could change capitalism, what would a new capitalism look like? And it was this idea that, we need a capitalism that values our values.
mm,
And at the time, I didn't know, I think I may have heard of Bitcoin, but I didn't
yeah.
know. But
Yeah.
the idea of having an honest, accurate ledger
Yes.
of value added and exchanged for other value, means that we will I think I said this in the interview for God Bless Bitcoin is, yeah, you can buy cocaine with Bitcoin. You can engage in slavery with Bitcoin, right? But the fact that we're keeping an accurate account of the cost of each of those things, and it's not externalized, and it's not adulterated with funny money that's just been printed but didn't come from value creation, means now we'll get to know the true cost of a cocaine economy. We'll get to know the true cost of trafficking humans and being held responsible for helping in the trafficking of humans. And if we do that, we have a better chance of saying, this costs too much.
Yeah.
And as you said, then it'll just be disincentivized.
This is Moksha again, right? Dropping those veils of deception.
Exactly. Right. We're not fooling ourselves into thinking, it's okay. It's not really hurting anybody.
Man, Vikram, such a good episode.
Yeah.
I'd love to do this again. If you're ever in Miami, I would love to have you in the studio.
Definitely. I was thinking of coming to Bitcoin Miami next time. So I'll,
it's in Nashville this year.
Oh, it is.
The Nashville, Tennessee in
Bitcoin
July.
Nashville?
Yeah.
All right. I will try.
Awesome. Well, if you make it, please let me know. Where can people find you on the internet?
Oh my God. I've been after stopping being CMO, I kind of took a break from most of the internet. I will have a blog up soon, and it'll be at vikram.fun. So and they can actually email me at vikram@vikram.fun. So for now, that will do. I do have a Twitter handle. It's newcapvikram. I haven't tweeted in a while, but we'll see.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Vikram, I don't know.
And,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. The company I'm on the board of is ZebPay. So zebpay.com, their blog, I'm usually there also. So
I don't know any better way to end this other than to say namaste, good sir.
Yeah, back at you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and best of luck and have fun with the rest of this series. I think the whole thing is going to be great.
Thank you.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.